let you introduce yourself here because Ben
Sure.
will use this. We're going to use this for a podcast. So,
Sure.
before we get too far into it, I'm going to have you introduce yourself. And um, for folks that are listening, um, this is a friend. Dean's a friend of mine, but he's also, I think, how did we first connected through Tigerton, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
that's how I first met you.
it could have been somewhere in there along those years, or at a deer fest
And it
or
was a
at one
long
of the
time
shows or
ago.
something like that. Yeah,
I mean,
quite a while ago.
it was a long time ago. So, Dean, I'm going to let you introduce yourself first. Um, and then I will get into my hopes. And you and I talked last week a little bit. I do want to talk about it's obvious the season is here now, and so
Hmm.
we're right on the fringe of actually being tracking season. And
Yep.
so, is it late to be talking about it for a trainer and for a handler and for a it's something that I hope people aren't thinking about it today to track tomorrow, but at the same
Right.
time, I think most of the arrows get sold at the archery shops the weekend before the open.
Right.
So
Right.
it
And
is
honestly,
we see
yeah, go
that.
ahead. Yeah, we get a lot of inquiries training wise, late in the summer. Mid
Sure.
August, somebody wants their dog trained, and unfortunately, like you said, we're kind of at the end of our training season before we get into the season.
Yeah.
What is it too late to start? I don't think it's ever really too late to start.
Right.
Um, you know, my suggestion for those that are just getting started and just want to do it, starting right now, um, is to see if your dog shows an interest,
Right.
um, and then get them on as many known kills as you can during the
Exactly.
season, and then think about during the off season getting into a training program, because I don't feel like the season is the time
Right.
to be doing that stuff.
Right.
And it's really nice to get some real world experience, um, on unknown kills and things like that. I wouldn't expect somebody to be putting their dog on, um, a green dog on someone's deer that really needs help, and
Right.
it's a complicated track or anything like that.
Right.
I don't think it's fair to the hunter, and I don't think it's fair to the dog,
Yeah.
to put that kind of expectation on them. Can some of them do it? Probably,
Right.
but I don't think that's the place to be experimenting,
Right.
with it.
For
So
sure.
I mean, if
For
it's
sure.
if it's family, friends, or something like that, I don't, so be it.
Right.
And that's a good learning experience, for both the handler and the dog. But like I said, if you have somebody calling you out of the blue because they heard you have a dog,
Right.
um, I don't believe that's I guess in my opinion, the ethical
Yeah.
thing to do, as a handler.
For sure.
So
For sure. Well, introduce yourself, Dean. Tell us a little bit about Muck Dogs and what you do, and then we'll get into it from there. Because I don't have a real structured list of stuff, but
sure,
I do have a few things I want, and we talked about some of it last week, and we'll see where we go from there. But introduce
sure.
yourself if you would.
Dean Muthig, the owner, CEO, so to speak, of Muck Dogs Deer Recovery and Training Kennel. We've been trackers with dogs for, this is our 20th season, and we've been training now. I think this is our fourth or fifth year professionally. Prior to that, I was a school teacher for 20 years, and we did some training on the side during the summer. But then it was one of those things where my passion for tracking, my love for tracking, um, it was one of those things that I wanted to see if I could pursue, to do as an occupation. So,
Sure.
in the fall, we track full time. That's all we do, 24/7 from the start of season till the end of season, and then mid spring we hook up, and we have client dogs come in, and we do board and train, and we do one on one stuff. Um, we may do phone conversations and things like that to get people started, but
Sure.
um, that's kind of our gig. We're deer dog guys, and we train tracking dogs.
How
Um,
many tracks did you go on last year?
my dogs in particular went on 269 tracks.
And
So,
are you a connect like do you have a network of trackers or is it just you? Or
um,
how do you run how does Muck Dog operate that way?
it's me and my dogs, um, and I have one person help, every now and again when we get busy, but for the most part, that's me. When we get busy, we have some volunteer help, but
Yeah.
no, mostly it's just me. So out of those, that's me going on 220 plus tracks by myself, and that's my Muck Dogs is my 4 dogs.
What's the most
So
tracks you've done in a day? I mean, yeah, if you
uh,
divide that out by a season, because what's your travel distance?
most of our tracks, quite honestly, out of those whatever 270, I'd say 260 between 260 and 265 are within an hour of Clintonville where we live.
Sure.
So we may go a little further here and there depending on the time of year and who it's for.
Yeah.
If it's a past client that I'm pretty close with, or if it's a close friend, I may travel a little further than that.
Yeah.
I've traveled, an hour and a half or an hour and 45 minutes or something like that. But I think the most we've ever traveled is 2 hours one
Sure.
way to go on a track, and that was it was down near Milwaukee, and it contacted 4 or 5 other trackers that couldn't go, and we didn't have anything that night, so we decided, we would give it a shot. Normally,
Sure.
that's something that we're gonna defer to somebody that's in the area.
Yeah.
For me, I want to help as many people as I can. So when I travel further from home, that's less people that I can help
Yeah.
in my area, and it almost never fails when if I get a track and I'm going to commit to one that's an hour and a half away. On my way there, I'm going to get a call that's 20 minutes from home.
Sure. Sure.
And that just, I don't know. I hate that I can't help people closer to home.
Right.
So, and there's getting to be so many more trackers in the state that there's most likely somebody in that area,
Yeah.
that's qualified that can help someone.
Sure.
So
What would you say, like our archery season, let's just use round numbers, and it's not the 15th, but it's usually right around the 15th, the second
mhm.
Saturday in September. Would there I would assume there's a spike in the early, opening weekend type
Yep.
action, because that I
Yep.
just look at the average hunter and I go, when does the average hunter, and are you tracking primarily archery or
We'll track firearm too, when it's open, but
yeah,
the majority of our tracks, just because the archery season is so much longer,
yeah,
the majority of our tracks are archery tracks.
sure,
We'll track during the 9-day rifle season, probably 30 firearm tracks, 25 to 30 firearm tracks. In a lot, a pile of those are opening weekend to Monday.
right, right,
Like Saturday night, we won't track during the day on the opener. It's just,
too
it's kind
dangerous,
of a
yeah,
suicide mission.
yeah,
So we'll go at night on that, opening night, Saturday night, depending on what kind of shot it is. And then usually we'll start tracking again Sunday midday if somebody has a larger area of private land that we can kind of feel safe on.
right, right.
So yeah,
When it
but
comes to the
mostly
bow,
archery.
when it comes to that bow season, do you see it go real high for the first weekend, let's say, and then
Mm-hmm.
taper down, and then obviously the mid to late October through the gun season, is that a hot spot time wise for you? I mean, it
Yeah,
has to be.
absolutely. Yep. The opening weekend is usually crazy, like you said,
It's hot,
and
right? I mean, it's
right. Yeah. It's everybody wants to get out and everybody wants to hunt,
yep,
and so we're super busy opening weekend. Like I said, into that Monday, usually you get an overflow of tracks on Monday from Sunday,
yep,
and quite well. It's less busy, I would say. We've built a pretty decent reputation to the point where we're busy, so to speak. We track almost every day of the season up until about December.
really,
Yeah, I would say honestly, um, there were maybe 3 days last
huh?
year during the
Interesting.
season that we didn't track. So,
Sure.
but we happen to be in a pretty good area.
Yep. Yep.
We track in probably 2 or 3 out of the top 5 harvest counties
Sure.
in the state.
Yep.
So that helps. So we have a high volume of hunters and we have a high number of deer that are getting killed. So
Yeah.
um, that surely helps. You get people who are like, man, how do you do so many tracks? Well, there's a lot of deer that get killed around
There's a
here.
lot of deer and there's a lot of hunters. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yep.
and the other thing is we've been doing it for a long time, so we've built a pretty solid word of mouth reputation that
Yeah.
hey, most likely I've tracked for somebody, or they know somebody that I've tracked for, or
Right.
so on and so forth. So
Right.
um, so we tend to get those calls right away, um, and that keeps us busy, which I'm super thankful for.
How do you, how do you separate now? This is the fourth or fifth year you said of
Yep.
full-time
Yep.
training.
Hmm.
Um, when you when you made that decision to do that from a business perspective for you, how do you separate your um, tracking from your training? And if I'm if I'm asking too much, you tell me to shut the hell up. But like from a business perspective,
Sure.
do you because when you're tracking, you're using your dogs.
Yep.
It's not a extension of client training with their dogs. It's you're going
Correct.
to train the dogs during your off season for
Yep.
clients, send it back home.
Hmm.
Are these clients are these clients folks that are like the majority of people listening probably they own the dog. They want it for their own personal use. And maybe friends and family, but they're not looking are they aspiring trackers that want to do the actual tracking but not necessarily the training?
I think there's probably a mixture of that. You get people that are wanting to really get into the tracking part of it. They just don't have time during the off season to train. They're working a lot, and they did, then their off time is during the fall,
Sure.
like most hunters. But there's a lot of them that, yeah, they want to do it for themselves or for their family or
Yeah.
friends or whatever. And you might get a handful of them where they get bit by the bug, so to speak, and they want to do more and more.
Yeah.
Um, we've had I had a dog from Missouri a couple of years ago where the guy did, gosh, like 70 or 80 tracks his first season with the dog, and then he did close to 100 last year. So that's the guy who's really motivated to get after it,
Sure.
and do it just because he loves doing stuff with his dog.
What kind
So
of dog did he have?
he hit a lab.
Okay. And did he, when you trained it for him, there's got to be there is for me when it comes to, because I don't, like if I train a tracking dog for a client,
Hmm.
they're a single family dog. Like
Yep.
it's not a tracker. It's not a professional tracker or an aspiring professional tracker. And, but there is this level of training the trainer, like, because I just feel
Yep.
like, especially with tracking, I'll say this because I don't, I'll say it to you because I know it won't hurt your feelings. But
Sure.
some trackers, it will hurt their feelings. And I don't say it in a way that will hurt feelings, but I do think that there's two different, to me, when I think about trackers and tracking teams, the team part is a real important
For sure.
verbiage there that
Yeah.
gets overlooked. Because I
Hmm.
think a lot of folks think, and I think this could be with all um, variations of whatever it is you're asking your dog to do. I think it's more so with tracking. I think people just think that you just push a button and or hold the leash and just
Right.
follow them to the deer.
Yeah.
And I don't think they recognize the integral part that the handler has when it comes to understanding, reading, helping when needed, but staying out of the way when not.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think people realize that the best tracking teams are that. They're teams not just tracking dogs. And
Hmm.
handling is an important part of it. And
Absolutely.
and sometimes it's passive handling as opposed to real active handling. And I think
Hmm.
people get confused with that because I think people want to get too involved at times with it. And we'll talk more on that. But when it comes to you training someone else's dog, I always feel like there's this training of the trainer that's just so important because
Hmm.
we can do all we want with the dogs, but if we don't give the ability to run it or operate it
Hmm.
properly, it's kind of a waste because it's
Yep.
like, man, you're just getting a very small percentage of the actual value out. How do you how do you look at that when you start training your clients' dogs that say both scenarios? Like the guy that's running 100 tracks, he's pretty serious.
Hmm.
Is that guy going, man, I need to does he have the interest level to go, now I want to train one of these things now? And if he does, is he better off for that, being able to say, I'm going to learn the parts that got me to here. Will that make me better when I get to that end of I got a dog that can effectively find game?
Yeah, I think honestly you're probably going to have a better connection and a better bond with your dog if you understand the approach and understand the process of training and what goes into it.
Yeah,
Um, at the same time, not everybody has that level of time to
sure.
put into it. So um, I understand both sides of it. We do a lot of coaching, so to speak,
Yeah,
with handlers. We send videos to the to the owners as to not just good tracks that their dogs are doing, but videos, and we might voice over, we might do different things to where we're slowing down and we're saying, okay, look at what just happened here. Look at the body language they just displayed. Their tail set, their head set, whatever the dog is doing, whatever that dog's read is,
mm-hmm.
um, to relay that information. And then when they pick the dog up, we do a half-ish day of handling. We'll run the dog on a track. Sometimes the handler wants to run the dog, and a lot of times they want to watch me handle the dog.
Mm-hmm.
And then we will kind of debrief after and talk about handling, talk about how to handle certain situations. And when a dog goes home, that's not the end for us.
Yeah,
It's an ongoing level of communication where, it's texts and phone calls and whatever else it is through training. And we're coaching them along as to, oh, hey, they did this time. What's your suggestion on how to handle that?
sure.
Because with you training dogs, you understand the same part as I do, is that if you have a really good dog, quite honestly, it's really hard to screw them up.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a dog that is kind of borderline, I do believe you can set them back quite a bit um, by not having the right approach and not handling the dog correctly, being too hard on him, being too soft on him,
Yeah,
whatever that is. I feel like that's my job to find that out in a dog and see how far I can push them and what works and what doesn't work. And then I guess that kind of puts the handler ahead because they already know that about their dog because I've gone through that process and I
sure.
can just kind of coach them on it. So
Mm-hmm.
I believe there's advantages both ways,
Yeah,
and I don't believe that the average person has the ability to put their dog on as many training tracks that I will in the time that they're here,
agreed.
you know.
Right, right.
So they're going to get a lot more repetition. They're going to get a lot more handling. They're going to get a lot more out of a short period of time than they would as if they were with their handler at home, unless you have somebody who is die hard and
Sure.
is looking to get after it every day.
So let me ask
So
you, so let me ask you this, because, and I had talked with you a little bit about this last week. So I wrote an article recently for Gun Dog. It'll be I think in the probably the December issue. But it it was making some comparisons about professionals versus amateurs.
mhm,
And and it wasn't intended, and it's not intended to be pro or con necessarily, one or the other, but I wanted to call out, like, there are some significant differences. Now you're very much on the pro end of the spectrum, which means you have, in my opinion, you have some advantages, like experience. The
mhm,
experience that you just talked about, being able to pick up on how do you get the most out of this dog because of this, and this, because I can see that, recognize it, have probably dealt with something like it
mhm,
or very similar to it. And then it becomes a reflex to you of, okay, I need to go, I feel like I go a little bit with this, a little bit with that, because of you've got a real big index of dogs to go back on and go, I remember when I had this and then
mhm.
tried this, so I'm going to do this. Where folks that only have a few dogs, and maybe the few dogs that they had weren't they didn't do that good of a job with. Like volume is important, I think, but
Mhm.
only depending on what you do with the volume. If you can train 1,000 dogs, and if you do a crummy job on all thousand
Right,
and one's not going to be any different, right?
right.
But some people can have 10 dogs, but boy, do they just have a good hand with them, and they understand them, and they have this ability. And I do think there's an ability for folks that work with animals, um, well, folks that work well with animals, there is something about them. They've got something about it where they connect, and they're able to read stuff and understand some basic things. And when you have that, it doesn't matter. You don't need 1,000 dogs, but maybe you can get as much done in 10, but it's just the pro gets a lot more. It has a lot more opportunity to get that experience quicker. But then you go to that time part of it, which is a question I have and it's more of a training technique than that question, but the amount of time that you have with a dog, when you bring a dog in for training from a client, let's say, when do you start bringing them in? In the spring, as soon as the weather gets kind of halfway decent?
Yeah, mid-March usually.
Okay.
Yeah,
So regionally, because of that forces you to, because it is there is stuff we can get done in the winter, but it's a pain in the ass. And
absolutely.
it's probably a waste of money for the person that's sending it because you're limited with some of the stuff you can do. But
Hmm.
so let's just say once the weather gets good, you've got this March window through, say, let's just say end of August when
Yep.
it's time for everybody to be home and you're focusing on your dogs for the season now. What does that training structure look like? Do they send them to you for uh periods of time? Is it
Yep.
how do you do? Because everybody does it a little bit different,
My
and this might
structure
help me
is
understand.
is 10 to 12. Well, my foundation program is 10 to 12 weeks.
Okay,
So, typically for me is when we bring a dog in for foundation stuff, the first 4-ish weeks is that imprinting and getting the dog to follow the track and to acknowledge the track that I want them to
sure,
follow. So a lot of that imprinting work is done in the first 4-ish weeks, and then we transition into uh, more distractions in wooded areas and different things like that. I do a lot
yeah,
of my first my first 4 weeks is typically in fields and in areas where there's the least amount of distraction
sure,
as
sure.
possible, and that differs from
It
a
more
lot of.
environmental distractions is
Absolutely right.
yeah,
Correct. So, for me, I'm trying to get a dog solid on that particular scent, and I want them to focus on only that scent,
yep,
um, and to not be distracted by other things environmentally, so that they can focus and concentrate.
yep,
My analogy there is the the reason why I go about it the way I do is would you train obedience to a dog or try to train a dog in obedience at a dog park?
I knew you were
Do,
exactly going to say that. Yeah, no,
do you know what I
totally.
mean? It
Right,
doesn't make
absolutely.
it
I want
makes
a
zero
sterile,
sense.
yeah, I want a
Right.
clean, sterile spot.
Right. And we're
Not, and
gonna
I don't
we're
mean
gonna
like health wise. I mean like
yeah, absolutely. Yep.
distraction
And
wise.
and and we're gonna find now you're never gonna find an area that is free of all distractions, but I'm gonna try as best as I can
Yep,
to
yep,
find areas that are real low distraction. And that, that's the way I do it. That's not the
yeah,
way there's a lot of other professional, tracking trainers that they're in the woods almost immediately because their
sure,
theory is, that's where we're going to be tracking. So that's where I want the dog
yep,
to do their job. But I
sure,
don't feel like that's very fair to a young dog to to throw that kind of expectation on them for them to focus,
sure,
and be able to follow a line and stay on that particular line, um, in areas of high distraction. I just don't feel like that's
yeah,
fair to them. So, we want to build a foundation and be in areas of as distraction free as we can for those first several weeks, and then we'll start transitioning over. And I'm trying to build up to, we're talking like 24-hour-old tracks in a distraction free area.
right,
And then once I feel like the dog has it and they're making self corrections on turns, they get off the line, they're self correcting and coming back to it.
hmm,
They know their purpose, they know it's out there, and this is the best smell in the world to them,
yeah,
you know. Um, so once we get to that point, then I start transitioning to the woods. And when I transition to the woods, do I jump to 24-hour tracks in the woods? Absolutely not.
yeah,
I might push way back to 6 or 8 hours
yeah,
to see, to make sure that's still an interesting smell to them, because there's going to be all sorts of other things
right, right,
out there for them. But then I'm going to start transitioning and work our way up to 24 hours in the woods. And to me, I just feel like I get a dog that is more solid at the end of our program doing it that way,
yeah,
rather than we get there faster. I feel like, even though we spend a fair amount of time in the field first and we're not in the woods right away, um, I feel like I get dogs that I have to correct last, and
Yeah,
are more apt to be redirectable, so to speak, when they do get distracted. Because let's face it, they're still puppies, they're still
right.
babies. Even when they leave here, or they're still a very inexperienced dog when they leave here. I don't. There's some dogs that are going to be rock solid when they leave here, but there's other ones that are obviously this whole thing, this whole training for tracking is a work in progress.
Mm-hmm.
Even with older dogs,
Right.
but I feel like we give them better tools to be able to react to different situations by doing that process slowly and
Right.
to do it in a distraction-free area to start. So
Yeah.
that's the way I do it.
Yeah. I feel like the way I describe that is, and the way I would describe what you just said is, you are a believer in the idea of setting dogs up to succeed, and you're a believer in the idea of
Absolutely,
incrementally building them, right?
absolutely,
Start pretty simple and add on. And I would imagine that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like I would imagine you would agree also with the idea, like you do that at a rate that they'll show you. They'll show you the rate at
right,
where they'll progress. And
absolutely.
so when you and now so now this is really making sense to me too. Of our For folks that are listening, Dean and I talked on the phone a week ago, and we talked about we started getting into some training conversations. And one of the things that I remember you saying was, we're probably not that far off. We don't train necessarily the exact same way as far as with the tracking stuff. And that is something I want to talk about too. But you said, I think you said something along the lines of, we're probably not that far off with with our mindset or our philosophies. And what
Right.
you just said is very much like exactly what I would say. If just substitute tracking for gun dog, shed dog, you know, whatever the
Right.
task it actually
Yep.
is. So there's where hearing that, like, yep, I would agree. I think you are right on. And I also agree that some folks will look at it differently. And in the bird dog world, this is another thing that we were going to talk about, but in the bird dog world, when I say bird dogs, I mean pointing dogs.
Yep.
It is the first time that I've ever, and I would say that world and the tracking world line up closer together than the retriever world does, or the shed dog probably too, and even the flushing dogs with the upland stuff.
Hmm.
And the reason I say it is because it is I would say it's almost impossible. I'm sure it's possible, but it's almost impossible. And if you have to do it, I wouldn't want to do it. I feel like it's a round peg in a square hole, but it's almost impossible to teach a dog to point. You're never going to teach a dog to point birds.
Hmm.
You're never going to train a setter to point. You're never going to train a GSP to
Sure.
point. You shouldn't have to, I don't think. And I don't think if you do, you got the wrong dog, right? But I feel like tracking is one of these things as well that we don't, I don't think we train them to track. I don't think we give them this idea of, you should smell something specific and then discriminate against all other scents and follow it to the end because there'll be something really good. I think we help them understand a game. I think we help them understand an end goal. But we're not teaching them to use their nose. We're not teaching them to understand the ability to sift through lots of distractions and temptations and similarities and staunch differences when it comes to the actual scenting elements. Would you agree with that? Like, they're similar that way. It's natural, right? Very natural thing.
Yeah, and like you said, I think there's some that are definitely more natural at it than others. Um, and yeah, I think I agree with that to a certain point. Um, I guess we can take a lot of different breeds and mold them kind of into what we want them, what we want their job to be. But I guess most dogs have this natural, I would say ability, but this natural desire to follow their nose.
Yeah,
Um,
right, right.
um, but I feel like I don't know where I'm going with this, but I feel like there's some dogs that are better suited or better geared um, towards what we're doing. Because let's be honest, if we're talking tracking versus other types of hunting, it's not super exciting to a dog. You know what I mean? Following an old
Sure,
cold line is not
sure.
really super exciting. So when I get some bird dogs in that are really excitable and different things like that, um, we do have to find what clicks for that dog to get
Yeah.
them to follow from point A to point B. Because, like I said, there's other things that are out there that they're a lot more interested in,
Yeah.
and
Right.
we have
Well,
to pull them off of
yes,
that. But
I would totally agree with that. And I think that that's the part where the training probably does come in. I think that there is a so and maybe I didn't describe it right either, but like I don't think all dogs are made to be trackers. I don't think all regardless of breed, because I think we've changed breeds so much over the years
sure,
that
sure,
like some, just because it is a breed doesn't make it that breed maybe should, but doesn't necessarily
100%,
do it. So like not all setters point. That's the sad thing about that.
right?
Not all pointers point. They
Yeah.
should in theory, but some don't. They're still setters and they're still pointers, but
Right.
they don't have that gene in them. They don't have that internal makeup in them
Hmm.
that taps into the natural. So for me, I would not want to take on the task of taking a non-pointing pointing breed and saying I'm going to make you point, or I'm going to figure out
Right. No, yeah,
how to bring this
100%.
out. Where
Yep.
the tracking dogs, I definitely think there are certain dogs in it, and some of it is just like physical, like how they're built. Some of
Hmm.
it is like capacity within their nose, like
Hmm.
that's all there. But there are probably, and I don't know your breed, but there are probably some of those Bavarian dogs that just aren't that good at noses. They just don't track that well. Because
Right.
and there's
Yeah.
and there's
It,
fear in my heart right now of like the popularity of that breed.
mine
It's in
too.
10 years from now it and so maybe that breed is a not quite there yet, but my fear is that
It's getting
because
there.
it's become so popular it will in time diminish as far as
Hmm.
its natural inherent ability and consistency across all the dogs do it, because I think over time all breeds have gone that way, and I don't
Absolutely.
it's hard to stop
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Popularity kills them because you're breeding dogs that don't have the genetic makeup that is desirable for it. Just like you said,
Right.
just because it's a lab doesn't mean that it's going to be a great retriever. Just because my breed, just because it's a Bavarian doesn't mean it's going to be an outstanding tracker.
Right.
There are a lot of Bavarians that are being bred right now that have never tracked anything in their life,
Right.
and
But they're
probably
the
have
right breed,
never. Right,
you know?
right. So and there's such a high demand for them. And the other
Right.
thing right now is, and is the same thing with labs or any breed that becomes popular, but even more so with our breed because there's so few of them, is that health problems now are
Yeah.
being compounded because you're breeding
Sure.
dogs with health problems unknowingly, and
Sure.
now it's just going to snowball. And
Sure.
especially since there's a small population or small gene pool to begin with,
Yeah.
now it's just gonna keep getting worse.
Yeah.
Um,
So I'll go back on that and say instead of it how I posted before, because I didn't do it very good. Now let's say they're real good natural. They have the natural ability. They have the talent.
mhm,
They have the genetics. They have the makeup. They have the noses. They're the right breed and they're the right dog within that breed to have
mhm,
all those qualities. Now when you look at like training a bird dog, or I don't even know if I call it training. I have really come to this idea of developing a bird dog. The best bird dog guys I'm around talk constantly about developing them.
mhm.
We're not training them, we're developing them, we're giving them all these opportunities to become bird dogs.
Right.
I feel like when they have it in them and you give them the opportunities and you kind of you push them the right direction and you shape them in the right way, that's a pretty easy thing to bring out a bird dog. I feel like with tracking dogs, if they have it and you give them the right opportunities, that's a very I want to use the word easy without offending someone because I'm not saying this is an easy thing, but that part of it is easy, I think.
Absolutely, and that's part of what I kind of meant before is if you have a good one, it's really hard to screw them up.
Yes.
They're going to
Yes.
be more forgiving because it's just they have it.
Yep.
And those
Yep.
dogs
Yep.
move along much faster. You can move so much faster in the training progression
Right.
with those type dogs. And I get those type dogs through all types of breeds. I mean, I've had some fantastic labs that have come through here. And some of them, literally, the first track I ever laid for them, stuck their nose in it and walked all the way down it to the end,
Sure.
never taking a step off the track. And this dog has never seen a line in its life.
Right. Right. Right.
And it was like a breath of fresh air, but it's like, oh my God, I don't think this handler or this owner knows what they have.
Sure. Sure.
And it was just, that by dumb luck, it was just a farm bred lab that, not papered or anything like that. It was just
Sure.
like this, you know, homely looking thing, to be honest with you, not a very attractive looking dog, but it was
Yeah.
just amazingly natural
Yeah.
at that particular game,
Yeah.
and that dog over the course of the summer, over 60 or some odd tracks that I put him on, one time, one time did he struggle on a line. And it was, as these are progressively getting harder up to 24-hour bloodless tracks
Yeah.
in a really high distraction area. And honestly, I accounted that I felt having a bad set of hooves that just didn't hold much for scent anymore.
Sure.
And I laid a line for him the next day, and he looked like $1,000,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was just one of those dogs that just had it,
Yeah.
And then at the same time, you have one of those dogs that has been with me for 4 weeks, and you don't feel like you're making much for progress. And
Yeah.
when you have these tough conversations with owners, like, man, I don't know if this is what you want to be doing with this dog.
Sure.
This
Sure.
this is, like you said, a square peg round hole. This is not, but lo and behold, you keep after it and you keep pounding and keep pounding and keep pounding and repetition, repetition, repetition. And all of a sudden, literally like 2 weeks before that dog goes home, they like a light bulb goes on,
Sure.
and they start doing it.
Sure.
Not that doesn't happen all the time, but um, and that particular dog that I'm talking about there was one of them. That was probably the most successful dog. That's that one from Missouri. It's like a high powered little lab that was just, would have been better as a bird dog,
Sure.
but turned out to be, for whatever reason, and I would have never guessed that in a million years, the way she tracked when she was with me. But it was just a matter of getting her on the real thing and maturity,
Yeah.
and whatnot. And that dog has become, is in 2 seasons has 100 recoveries,
Right.
and it has just been fantastic. So, but
So
that doesn't happen all the time.
how many dogs do you bring in at a time? Because you were talking, you got a 10 to 12 week window that
Yep.
you're going
So
to take them.
we'll take up to 6 at a
Okay.
time. So, and then we might have monthly ones in there too.
Of varying
Um,
breeds though.
what's that?
Of varying different breeds.
Yes. Yep. Yep. So like this year, we, like our first session, we had um, 2 labs, a Hanoverian. Gosh, I'm trying to think. We've had a bunch of labs in here. I had 2 labs in my last session. German Shorthair I got in right now. I've got a Mountain Feist
Mm-hmm.
in right now. But various. It varies year to year. Bloodhounds, coonhounds,
Sure.
um, but some I had a Weimaraner in here just this last session here. But they're usually a hunting type dog, whether it's a versatile breed,
Yeah.
German Wirehair, German Shorthair, hound breed. Bloodhounds are pretty popular. They're not terribly popular around here. We don't get a ton of them. I had some Catahoulas, some Lacies,
Yeah.
Beagles, a little bit of everything.
And
So
and when they're coming in, now they're coming into you because you had mentioned foundation, first 4 weeks you focus on foundation. What threw me there was because I thought when you say foundation, it's foundation of tracking. It's scenting
Yes.
concepts.
Yes.
What
Yep.
age are these dogs coming to you?
I try not to take them at less than 6 months old.
Sure. That's what I was wondering. Because when you start saying foundation, I'm going, my foundation is different. Like my
Yep.
definition of foundation, because I'm talking
Yep.
like an obedience type
Yep.
foundation. So
Yep. And
you're bringing them in. You want them past that. You want them nice dogs, but you want to get right into tracking stuff.
right, right. And honestly, that's why, like my own dogs, we're doing it the day they come home.
Yeah,
And I would recommend to anybody that wants to train their own dog is to start imprinting them when they first come home.
sure.
Um, and you can do that and obedience, I feel,
Yep.
at the same time. Because, I feel when you have them yourself, you can bring them along at as slow as a pace as you
Hmm.
want,
Hmm.
you know, and to develop. But when somebody's paying me, to train their dog in a certain period of time, I want them to be able to be at a mental capacity where they can handle, and I say pressure, but I say maybe intensity is a
Yeah.
better
Yeah.
word
I know.
for it. The
Yep.
intensity of
Expectations.
training that I want to put them through, I don't think younger dogs are mentally capable of that.
Yes.
So, I prefer them to be 6 months old so they can, so that we can push them a little harder
Right.
than we would a young puppy. And I wouldn't want to push a young puppy that hard just because I don't want to turn
They're
them
not,
off to it.
yeah, and they're
So,
just not ready for it, right? I mean, they're just not
right.
capable of it
Yeah,
mentally, and
they're
there's some
babies.
physical parts too. Yeah. And so that's a great i- idea where what I see, I think about it the opposite way when and part of this professional versus amateur. And so it's really interesting. I talked to this um recently. I talked to I ran bird dogs with him. He's a friend of mine, and he was inspiration for this latest article. And he was telling me about the dog. He had a dog that's about 18 months old, um, and was a standout. Looked looked um, looked fantastic on his birds. He responded really well. He was doing stuff that older dog. He was looking real mature in a lot
Sure.
of ways. He's still very much a puppy in a lot of ways, and we saw that too. Like he made some mistakes that were puppy type mistakes, which you just can't hold against him. But some of the stuff he was doing that was just incredible from a more advanced training level, steadiness. He was just very steady.
Sure.
And so that was fascinating to me. And I asked my friend about it. And I said, "How did you do that?" And so he said, "Well, I started it from the very beginning. Because he had the puppy at 8 weeks old. He
Hmm.
said, so I never let the bad habits form, and I started shaping the what I wanted from the beginning
Hmm.
with a reasonable amount of expectation, like
Hmm.
it wasn't pressure from a force standpoint,
Correct.
but he built a culture around the dog with expectations that the dog adapted to. And
Hmm.
so it started to make the right choices and do the right things really early on.
Hmm.
But now this is across the window of 18 months. And I asked him, I said, because he steadies dogs for other people that come in for 3 months or 4 months or whatever
Sure.
the time
Hmm.
frames are. And I asked him, I said, well, Jesus, if you use that technique with your dog, do you train your clients' dogs that way too? And he said, no, no, I cannot train them the same way as I train my own because I don't have the ability to have 18 months with them.
Right.
I got them for a short window of time. So with them, I do a whole different type of training because it's a very systematic thing that I have to get them in and out in a window of time. And I have expectations to meet. I've told the
Hmm.
owners I'm going to do this, this, and this. And these are ways that I can manage to get that accomplished in that period of time. So I started sitting there going, well, yeah. So the thing that he had with his own dog, and he chooses to train his own dog differently, is because he had all this time.
Hmm.
But what I didn't really think about as much until you just said it was like, yeah, you're going to start your dog on these. You would prefer to have those puppies if they were started out before the 6 month window
Hmm.
because it would help you at 6 months get on down the road. But you've
Sure.
got a system that you can take them at 6 months real green without much and punch them into it because they're old enough now and you can. And
Hmm.
I'm not saying it's right or wrong to do it either way, but I
Yep.
look at it and I go, well, what does the pro do? And the pro does it with the system because of the calendar. dictating it.
Absolutely. Yep.
But more importantly, I go, but what does the pro do with his own dog?
Yeah.
And that's what I want to share because I want people to realize, even if they're going to send it to you, like the clients that are going to send the dog to you, if they did now with the problem I think is a lot of people that are quote unquote amateurs, and I don't say amateurs derogatory at all, but like non-professionals that are going to send their dogs off to be trained. I think what they don't realize, and I saw this weekend at the Waterfall Expo, was they just don't realize they shouldn't ask their dogs to do so many things.
Yep.
Even if they show them like they're brilliant, you got to be patient. And like example I have is this guy at the Waterfall Expo has a 4-month-old dog, and I was there with two 5-month-old dogs, and he came up after and he's just, wow, shaking his head and looking at these 5 months old dogs. He couldn't believe their age and all that stuff. And he was telling me some of the problems he was having. And some of them were stemmed off of he's trying to handle his dogs, cast them left and right, and all this stuff. And I go, how old did you say that dog was again? He said 4 months. I said, man, these dogs won't think about that for another 10 months, 8 months maybe. I don't even know when, but they're 5 months old right now. You like what you see, and we're doing about a quarter of what you're trying to do with the 4 month
Right.
old dog. So he was a little ambitious in
Sure.
the wrong way. But
Hmm.
like if and so what I tried to leave there with was like you got the ambition and you're willing to put the work in. Just do less, but do
Hmm.
better at the
Right.
less. And so when you say, I would rather, I'm going to start my dogs right away with simple people, I think people think you're going to, I don't want people to mistake. You're not starting your dog right away at 8 weeks like you do the 6-month-old that comes in.
Oh, no, 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 not at
And
all.
that's where people miss out because they go, well, we'll learn how he did it from 6 months on, and I'll start it with my 8-week-old. And that can create as many problems or more by the time they get to be 6 months. But
Yeah.
if you can, we need to help people from the beginning understand slow little baby steps of in the right direction
Hmm.
are how you do it and how I do it. And that's where I think we're missing sometimes when we talk to people.
Right. Yeah. I'm not putting those same type of expectations on an 8-week-old puppy. We're just imprinting them on deer scent or hoof scent or blood scent to get them to realize that, hey, if I stick my nose in this scent and I follow this scent, good things happen.
Right. Light at
And
that tunnel. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, like and I've watched some of your foundation stuff and some of your tracking stuff. Oh yeah, you throw kibble out in the yard and the dog, is out there and they're using their nose to find it and they're getting rewarded when they're using their nose. I mean, I'm doing the same thing,
Sure.
but it's in a little different way, but I am doing the same thing. It might be into a more concentrated area and it might be involve deer scent,
Sure.
but that dog walks into that area with deer scent and there's a food reward there and they're
Sure.
like, "Oh my god, this is great. I
Sure.
get I get rewarded when I smell this."
Right.
And now all I do is we take and we build off that. Now instead of just it being into this, condensed area, now we turn it into a line,
Sure.
and we go baby steps there. And people are always, well, how long of a track are they doing? How old of a track are they doing? I, I don't care.
Right.
I
Right.
just care that they are showing an interest in it and following it.
Right.
And if they do really good at it, I may lengthen it out some, or I may make it a little older. And I'm not in a hurry. I'm not in
Right.
a hurry to get there. If
Right.
they show
Right.
they can do it, then I'm going to move along a little bit. And like you
Right.
said, it's just going to be baby steps.
Right.
But if they don't show me that, and most of it is just focus.
Right.
If they don't show me that they can focus, well, guess what? They're not ready.
Right.
So I'm
And
I'm
that's
not
okay
gonna
too,
then, yeah, and I'm
because
not
it
gonna
just
ask
takes
them,
time, right? Like,
yeah, I'm not gonna ask them to do that. And I've had tons of people call me, and there's a guy in particular that he has some very good tracking dogs, and he started a young lab a couple of years ago, and he is super duper eager, and he has some really good ideas and some really good things like that. And he was, he called me and or messaged me and was frustrated with how things were going, and I'm like, how old is this dog again? And I don't even remember. It was like 6 or 8 months old. And I'm like, man, you got to understand that this dog's a baby.
Right.
just
Right.
relax. I
Right.
mean, you
Right.
just relax. I said, how about, you've been doing 3 lines a day with this dog. How about do one every few days? Or
Yeah.
how about you don't do any of it for like a week?
Yes.
He's like, what? Like a week? Like, how about you just give him a week off to just be a puppy? And if you want to put expectations on him somewhere, how about it just be some manners
Right.
of how to be a good canine citizen?
Right.
Just
Right.
make it fun stuff. But they don't, you don't have to press and
Right.
get from point A to point B in a certain amount of time. I mean, some dogs do, but not all dogs do. And that's, I got to remind myself that with my own dog when we talk about my 3-year-old dog. I mean, this is
Right.
a 3-year-old.
Right. Right.
And when it comes to my own dogs, patience is not a a quality that I have with my own dogs.
Sure.
Unfortunately, you know what I mean. And I
Yep.
and I wish I did, but I got to remind myself of that sometimes. Is that this is a marathon.
Yes.
It's not a sprint.
Yep.
And
Yep.
although some dogs get there really fast, you can't measure all dogs like that.
Right. Right.
And you can't put those kind of expectations on all dogs because you're going to be disappointed,
Right.
or frustrated.
The break there to me is so great to hear you say it because this last weekend I answered a lot of questions from people at this waterfall thing. But I did feel like when I walked away from it, one of the most common answers I told people was, you should take a break. And people just don't realize because they'd explain what was going on. There was this, this, and this, and they wanted to get past this, and they were trying to get the dog to do a certain thing. And my answer really quickly was, just go away from it for a while. You should take a break. They were all young dogs, and
Hmm.
my gut was the dogs hit a little bit of a wall, probably for whatever reason, because I can't tell in their explanation. I can't see the dog doing it, but it's come to a little bit of a wall in that road, and I've done it so many times myself and made the mistake so many times of trying to push through it and break the wall, break through the wall
Yeah.
that and it never worked, and it just became frustrating. And it really became especially like a long time ago. I was so hell bent on trying to get some of this through some of these struggles that I was having. I actually think we took quite a few steps back in the big picture because I'd lose my cool. I'd get
Oh yeah. Right.
frustrated.
Hmm.
The dog would really start to question not only
Nothing good happens.
right, the action we were doing, they were confused about. Then they were
Hmm.
confused about like, is he mad at me? If the dog had any type of conscience that way, it's second guessing me. And what I have become a lot better at is at the sign of trouble, I slow way down pretty quickly. Like whatever they're showing me, I slow quickly. I try to assess like at what point did I start? Where did I miss the first signs of this?
Hmm.
Because now I'm just starting to recognize it. And did something trigger it? Is there a reason why we're having this issue? But the best result for me, the best way I found results has always been just stop doing it for a little while. I usually try to like come to an end with it, like figure
Hmm.
out the next session to do something that is very close to it, but steps back where the dog can do it right, and
Hmm.
then put that to bed for a little while and go away from it and quit. Like it's this idea of the pot that's watched never boils.
Hmm.
So like
Yep.
quit trying to focus on getting something done, go away, do something different. But I think when I come back to it, it seems like whatever the reason is that little bit of time. And some people, when I say a little bit of time, it could be a week for sure.
Sure.
Like, and
Hmm.
I'm not saying don't work with the dog. I'm saying don't work on the dog with that, but go away from it for a while. And usually when I go away from it, I try to make a plan of, is there something I could work on away from this that would be nice to bring with and come back to this with
Sure.
and have it be better? And usually when you get back there, it's like, for whatever reason, that dog just moves right through it. Like it was
Hmm.
never, not much of an issue at all. And I don't know if it's the time. I don't know if it's just the break, the idea of like give the dog a chance to clear its head and come
Hmm.
back at this, whatever it is you're working on. But the break to me, when you have those, especially those young dogs, and when they're young, I do think it's like a big puzzle, but like just work on little pieces, little tiny
Hmm.
pieces, and they don't have to all be like put together at that point. I don't think people realize that.
Yeah, right. In when you said that, take a break, and when we were talking about this, and that just immediately came to mind for me. Like when I'm handling young dogs on tracks, and we run into issues, many times it's a focus issue for us. For
Hmm.
whatever reason, the dog has
Sure.
lost focus.
Yeah.
They're they've gotten distracted by off game. They've got distracted by something else, or they can't figure something out. And a lot of times, what happens, these dogs, and mostly these dogs are overexcited. They're super excitable, and
Yeah.
they get to a point where they just lose it, and they can't focus. And we talk about taking a break from training, for a certain period of time to let a dog regroup and whatever else. And
Hmm.
we can do that within sessions, even in the middle of a session where for me, it would be in that particular situation, I might put a dog in a sit stay, and we're going to sit there until that
Yeah.
dog decompresses and can focus again. And I might go as far as moving that dog past that particular area that's giving it an issue,
Hmm.
and then letting that dog regroup and gather itself, and then very calmly, okay, let's go back to
Sure.
work, and let's
Sure.
try it again. And if we can't focus, I and I don't like doing this, but sometimes if a dog just refuses and can't handle that particular situation, guess what? We just go back to the truck, and we're going to try again tomorrow.
Sure. Sure.
I like to end on a positive note, but there
Hmm.
are times where this isn't going the way I planned, and we're
Right.
just going to stop.
Right. Neutral is better
Um,
than negative in that
right.
situation.
And so we just go back to the truck, and we come back and we try again the next day. And like you said, I sit there and replay this situation in my head. Is why did this happen?
Why? Yeah.
What is going on? Did we skip a step somewhere, or is this dog just not ready for this yet,
Right.
or whatever it is? um, but I believe, when dogs come to me, I believe we can um, avoid a lot of those situations just by having the owner do things prior to the dog getting there. And one of them, is foundational stuff like obedience,
Hmm.
and having the dog just be a good canine citizen. But the other thing is to expose their dog to as many new environments as possible,
Sure.
so that so everything that we show them isn't brand new.
Yep. Yep.
Whatever that may be, and try to get them into as many areas and as many new places and different things as you can, because for us, then that's going to make things a whole lot easier, so that they can actually have the capacity to learn, because they're not, you know, have all these other outside factors going on.
Sure. Sure.
So,
No, it makes total
um,
sense. You said something about training lines before. You had mentioned that the one guy that was pushing a little hard and running multiple lines a day with a dog. What does that look like for you? I've got my thoughts on it, but what is your thoughts on frequency of now again, I would ask, what are your thought? How do you approach frequency of lines with clients' dogs?
I knew you were going to go
How do you
there.
address frequency of lines with your own dogs? Because I think they're both work. Like I'm not
Hmm.
saying one works, but I'm looking at it and going, they both work and some work probably better for certain dogs and certain people.
Hmm.
But I have a thought on it, but I'm curious as to yours. And if it's the exact same, tell me. I'm not trying to skew you one way or the
Sure,
other,
sure.
but what are your thoughts with some of that stuff, frequency?
Frequency, it's different for me with client dogs, because, like we talked about, I have a time frame
Hmm.
where I'm expected to put out a product.
Yep.
So, early on in that foundational stuff, we might be tracking 6 out of 7 days in a week. So early on,
Sure.
foundation stuff, and they're not difficult tracks.
Yep.
But for me, it's typically once a day, once to maybe twice a day. I don't like to I don't like to overdo it. I like to end on a positive note. I like the dog to be able to think about it and be like, oh, that was, if I did this, I get this.
Yeah.
Um, but, and then once we get into distractions in the woods and different things like that, then we're in aging lines a lot longer than we're at like an every other day type thing. So
Sure.
it's
The
usually,
test gets harder, right? Like,
yeah, right, right. And honestly, it's it's not a physically demanding thing,
mhm,
because dogs are not, wearing themselves out physically,
right,
but the processing in trying to focus and in trying to do all these things mentally for a dog
right.
is draining. I
Hmm.
feel like it is anyways.
Agreed.
You can I can go on a 600-yard track that's a really difficult, complex track, and a dog is just gassed at the
Right,
end.
right, right,
Almost like you ran them for 10 miles.
right.
They're just drained because the amount of processing they have to do scent wise on a difficult track,
Hmm.
um, is just it's tough on them. And if you think about that, like with a person too, like when you really have to think and really challenge your mind and different things like that, it's exhausting,
Right,
almost to the point of physically exhausting. You're tired, you're drained, and it's the same thing for dogs. So
right.
um, that's our frequency at it, and I might go more or less, depending on the dog.
Sure.
If the dog is doing really good and moving on, we're going to stay at that. But all of a sudden, maybe the dog starts to struggle. Well, does the dog need more, or is the dog burnt out, and do they need less?
Right,
We do need to take a break, and we need to do less frequency. And that's, for me, that's trying to read the dog and how they're working, and trying to find a happy medium as to how many tracks a week
right.
we're doing,
Hmm.
and what's going to get us to progress the fastest.
Right,
And my own dogs, when they're puppies, I'm doing imprinting stuff. Like we're talking like 8 week stuff. I'm doing imprinting stuff usually at mealtime. You know what I mean? So that might be two times a day. Now, does that mean that we might run tracks 2 times a day for them to, I incorporate their meals into it.
sure,
So they might track and then find their whole meal at the end of the track,
sure,
and we might move on from there. And then we're gradually going to, once we start to lengthen things out and when things start to get more complex, it's honestly once or twice a week,
sure.
depending on the dog.
What did
Um,
what did you teach when you were a teacher?
I
What
was a PE teacher.
Okay. So as a teacher, this is how I've
Hmm.
thought about it. I've always thought about like kind of like raising young dogs is like raising kids in a lot of ways. I
Hmm.
think teaching is like should be like raising kids, and raising kids should be a lot like teaching. Like they should be
Right.
pretty interchangeable. You
Dog
could
training
say
is pretty similar itself.
Yeah, you could say coaching, you could say
Yep.
coaching a
Absolutely.
team,
Yep.
you could say being a boss of a company. Like there's a lot of parallels there, I think. And I think what it comes back to is like leadership, like good
Hmm.
leadership, right? So
Yep.
I always think of the education, and I was not a good student, but when I think about education, and I've got kids that are in school now, so I think about it quite often. And I always think like when I'm training a dog, regardless whether it's tracking or any other skill set, if I just gave them final exams all the time, like
Right. Yep.
I'd fry them. Like
Sure.
I know I would have as a student.
Hmm.
I would had never been able. Now I'm sure there are some kids that are academically very gifted that could take tests every day and do just
Hmm.
fine. But like education wise for me was always best when I was at my best if the teacher started out the semester or the year or whatever with some pretty low level basic information about the subject,
Hmm.
built in games, made things fun. Like,
Hmm.
around the world was a thing that we played.
Oh
Like
yeah.
it
Yeah.
was a math thing, like uh multiplication, and you were faster answer to the next guy. It was a game, and at the end we got a now and later from our
Hmm.
math teacher. Like
Right. Right.
there's all these different ways that they inspired me as a student to actually engage in the activity. And
Hmm.
a byproduct of that was if they structured it well enough and they tricked me into learning and
Mm-hmm.
not realizing I was being taught. It was kind of a fun way for me to absorb information. And then you do that for a while. And then maybe for a chapter of a on a subject. And then at the
Mm-hmm.
end they'd give me maybe halfway through they'd give me a quiz. And then if we didn't do good on the quiz, it kind of told the teacher, we're struggling here. We got to work on this or whatever. By the end of it, they might give you a test, and then and then you take that test. But by the end of the class, you probably had 6 sections of tests that you had to work to, and now they
Mm-hmm.
combined them and they gave me the final. And like, could I retain all that stuff? That was always the
Mm-hmm.
question to get to
Sure.
the end and do the final. And I always felt like when I'm running a dog on a track, I used that analogy because I looked at it and went, I don't want to grill this dog. Now, some of them I think are that student that's capable of it and maybe
Mm-hmm.
thrives on it. Maybe they're built
Yep.
for that. Maybe they
Yep.
are test takers. But I also think that there were times where I would see some of my dogs because I think training lines got boring, and it might have been how I
Mm-hmm.
was setting them up. I might not have been
Sure.
set it. If you don't set them up properly, it's not beneficial either. There's a science there. But the whole theory of just running a lot of training lines to train the dog, for me, ran the risk of potentially burning out, potentially
Sure.
boring, potentially making it so easy that the dog looked like an absolute hero, but really was just kind of cruising. Like, I don't know that I was challenging much.
Sure.
I wasn't preparing them for situations that they probably needed to be prepared for. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how I kind of always looked at it. And I have leaned on the idea of break down it in a similar way of like my training lines are maybe not the final exam. Maybe the final exam is the deer. Maybe the final exam is
Right.
a hard deer,
Mm-hmm.
where maybe part of the tests are actually actual tracks because they're better than I can lay for a trail. I, the trails were always for me. Like the tracking line seemed like it was always for me.
Mm-hmm.
The actual deer was I felt like for the dog. And the ones that me personally, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, is when I was taking young dogs out to track, and I never did it at the frequency that you do, but I was not taking these dogs that I didn't know and have a lot of confidence in on anything that I wasn't really, really sure the deer was
Sure.
dead and we are going to find it with or without the dog. Like, to
Sure.
me, that was a very important transitional part of getting the dog's confidence, but maybe more importantly, getting my confidence in my dog.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, I, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's varying trains of thought on that. You're going to get guys that are going to tell you to, in that respect, as far as going on real deer, which I do believe is probably the ultimate training um, exercise, so to
Sure.
speak. It's the best way, if you bring the bird dogs into it, birds make bird dogs, and
Absolutely.
and deer make deer dogs. And we talked about this before, but our in the tracking world, we're a little bit unique as far as our opportunities and what our opportunities look like to train. But to get back to that, I I personally with my own dogs is like you said is I want them to be successful and I want them to be a positive experience so that I'm taking them on tracks that I feel that they are up to their level, so to
Hmm.
speak. I don't want to
Sure.
put anything that's out of reach, a really super
Yeah.
difficult track or anything like that. Because I don't put really high expectations on dogs their first year. So if I can get them on 10 to 15 to 20 real life tracks, and some of them might be known kills, or some of them are definitely deer that I know that I have a pretty good idea they're dead.
Hmm.
And for me, that's to get a good read on my dog in real life and to get them to know that there's that particular reward is at the end and to set up positive experiences. And you're going to have other guys that are going to tell you to put them on every track you can get them on because no time behind your dog is wasted time.
Sure.
And I can I understand that and I can see that, but that goes back to my theory, or not my theory, my thought before on I don't believe that um, young dogs, or I don't think it's the place for young dogs to be gaining experience on somebody who's really counting on you to
Sure.
find their deer.
Yep. Yep.
So
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
away from that. But to get back to what I was talking about before is like you said, training lines are number one to teach the dog their job, to know what they're supposed to do, to imprint the dog what they're supposed to do. But it's also for the handler to learn and read their dog, and that's why honestly I feel it's super important to set up known lines, so that you know where the line is,
Right.
and so that you can learn your dog's behavior when they're on the track, when they're locked in, when they're off the track, when they've lost it, when they're
Hmm.
trashing,
Yeah.
when they're searching, when whatever it is all those situations are for you to be able to learn your dog, so that when you do get out in the real world and you don't know where the track is, that over the course of this many tracks that you've done on known lines, you know what your dog is doing
Right.
based on all of your experience before. And, you know, our progression also is, you know, early on, I, I am not letting the dog very often, and this might differ from a lot of other trainers as well, but I'm not allowing dogs to get far off the track. So if they're on the track and they go off the track, I, especially early, I'm planting my feet and I'm stopping until that dog comes back to the line.
Sure.
And when I see they reacquire the line, then I'm going to go ahead and move
Sure.
on. Now, I don't do that later in training, but when we're laying a foundation and I'm trying to get a dog to develop line sense, so to speak, and to stay close to the line, that's what I'm doing, because over repetition, the dog's going to figure out, man, if I'm off of this scent, we don't go anywhere.
Sure.
When I go back to the scent, we move forward, and I may get a verbal praise or whatever that is,
Yep.
and
Yep.
whatever our cue is, and then I get to this really cool reward that's at the end.
Sure.
And so all that is a step by step process, to get to our finished product, or as finished product as we can get,
Right.
to where that dog knows their job and they're self doing all this self correction stuff and getting from point A to point B, ignoring all this other stuff.
Sure.
Um, but that's, to me, that's done. All that foundation is laid prior to getting, to the real thing.
On the real thing, right?
Right.
Important for people to understand, we track with leads here. And
Yep.
some
Yep.
people that are listening to this will be like, what does he mean? But you're a leash tracker, we're a leash tracking
Yep.
state. What's your thoughts on that? Have you ever have you ever been anywhere that you could track off lead?
No, I haven't. But, I do believe that many times you can get in the way of a dog as a handler, and I've made mistakes, plenty of mistakes before, pulling my dog off a track. You misread your dog, you don't trust
Yeah.
them, whatever it is, and you pull a dog off a track, and all of a sudden, the dog might not be that tolerant of being pulled off the line. You might pull them off the line one time, and they're like, "Oh gosh, he doesn't want me to follow this, so I'm just going to take
Right.
something else."
Sure.
And all of a sudden, you're for a walk in
Right.
the woods.
Right.
And there are some other dogs that are extremely persistent, and they're going to go right back to it, and they're going to go right back to it, and they're going to be pretty forgiving.
Yeah.
But I do believe that, many times that the handler is at fault, and it's not the dog, because the handler misreads the dog or whatever. I really enjoy watching a dog work. I do believe there's some value in off lead. Um, I think more deer would be recovered if you could run off lead in dispatch. And I don't mean hunt, and I don't mean marginally hit deer that are probably going to
Sure.
survive. I'm talking of, deer that are, that we might bump, that we might not give enough time, that we might bump, that an off lead dog might be able to catch and
Yep.
bay. And we can go in there and we can end it
Right.
much quicker than that deer suffering.
Right.
And I think a lot more deer are recovered that way, and the recovery percentages are higher off lead for that fact. Is
Yeah.
that you're not going to be able to catch those deer on
Right.
lead.
Right.
But I do really enjoy leash handling. I really enjoy watching a dog work and seeing things unfold,
I do
and
too.
different things like that. I've ran hounds, I ran bear hounds, I've ran coyote hounds, and different things like that. And you watching them, you can do the same thing. You watch the race unfold on the GPS, and you can tell exactly what the dogs are doing based
Right.
on what their pattern looks like on the map overview. And if they made a loss, or if they've lined it out, or you can hear their bark or whatever, you know what's going on.
Right.
But there's something about watching it unfold and watching the dog work.
Right.
That's really rewarding. Now, that being said, we get dogs in from off lead states and they want us to train them to track off lead, but my foundation is still on lead,
Mm-hmm.
because like when I talk about wanting to develop line sense, I mean the dog sticking close to the line. Not all dogs are genetically programmed to stick their nose right in the track. You might
Right.
have some bird dog types that tend to want to quarter
Yep.
a little bit on a track, and they're kind of bracketing the scent. They're back and
Yep.
forth and
That's
whatnot. But
my
at the
dogs
same
for
time,
sure.
yeah. But I still want them. Do you get the same result, or do you get the same result as a dog that air scents and finds a deer? Yeah, but I still believe you're going in tougher deer, tougher tracks if you have a dog that sticks
Yeah.
close to the line.
Yep.
And for the simple fact that you get a dog that's an air scenter, or that's the bracket scent, is when those dogs get out of scent and lose scent, they're typically much further off the main line
Right.
than a dog that sticks close to it. And now we have to work harder to try to reacquire. But there's also super valuable, especially in on-lead track information on that line
Sure.
that helps me determine what kind of wound we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And how maybe we should back off of this deer, or maybe we should push this deer a little bit, or direction is this deer headed, or beds and different things like that. All
Right.
this valuable
Right.
information that you can find on the track when your dog stays close to the line. So, personally, that's what I'm trying to do, is develop dogs that stay close to a line. And, I'm setting up training tracks in order to try to accomplish that. I'm very conscious of the wind, both when I lay a track, but especially when, I'm looking at forecasted winds as to when I'm laying or when I'm going to run the track. Where's the prevailing wind coming from when I'm going to run this track? Because ultimately, I want to try to set up this line so that the wind is at my back for as much as the track as I can get it, which is completely opposite of the bird dog world.
Right.
We want to work, the bird dog world, you want to work with the wind in your favor. But for me, I want to try to control that variable so that the wind is at our back, so that the dog has to stick their nose in the line
Sure.
to smell it, and they can't cheat, so to speak. Because
Sure.
I think dogs are such natural when it comes to air scenting. It's a natural thing for them.
Mm-hmm. All the time. Yep.
Their nose is up and they follow it to wherever they are. So I don't believe that you have to set up training to do that, to hone their air scenting skills. But I don't think it's very natural for all dogs. Some dogs it is, but to stick their nose in an old cold line
Right.
and follow it.
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to imprint, and that's what I'm trying to build our foundation on, is a dog that wants to stick close to the line
Sure.
to find their prize at the end. So that's how we go about it. But when it comes to the real world, can we control the wind direction?
Right.
Absolutely not. But I'm not talking about the real world. I'm talking about training tracks. And in training
Right.
tracks, I want to control every variable that I can to be able to work on different parts that I
Yep.
want to work on.
Totally.
So
makes sense.
Yeah, it's no different than any other kind of, training. We're trying to control these variables to work on certain things.
Right.
And it would be no different than, if I talk about sports, it'd be no different than, hey, I want to work on this part for baseball, and I want to set up a tee to work on this particular, I'm working on an outside pitch, or I'm working on a low outside pitch. Well, how do you do that? Well, I can put it in this spot every single time, and we can work and we can get repetition this way.
Right.
So I'm setting up my training tracks that way in order to work on the weaknesses of the particular dog. I might, gosh, this dog is really having problems on turns. They're not recognizing the turn fast enough. They're not doing this. So, I might set up tracks that have 6 or 7 turns in a very short area, so that they're working on, all the dog figures out, man, if I work too fast, I'm lost. So, and we've got different techniques to slow the dogs down too, to get them to help figure that out. But we might set up those things, or if we get dogs that are, really struggling with distractions, we might set up lines where we drag, critters along the line, and we mark those spots. so that
Hmm.
we know exactly the spot that we drag something across there, so that when the dog reacts to it, we know we can make a correction or
Sure.
however that needs to happen. So we set up those situations based on whatever the dog's weakness is.
Right.
So
And so training to me, training lines for us are training, but it's it's not necessarily what I think some people think of. It's not necessarily training the dog to track. It's us controlling these elements that
mm-hmm.
we can start to train for specifics within the track, like specific
Yep.
things that are come up. So I think that's real valuable to understand as because I do think that there's a misconception when it comes to the idea of training tracking dogs. And I just think that I hope that us having this conversation and explaining some of that, little light bulbs will turn on because
Mm-hmm.
it really gives us, it's a relatively controlled, it's a replicated or it's duplicating it as best we can,
Right.
understanding that it's not the real thing,
Yep.
but it's a tool for us because
Yep.
we can manipulate it and kind of control it to be
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is we want to make out of it.
Right.
That leads me to the question of scenting. So you and I had talked about this a little bit. You
Mm-hmm.
are a traditional, what I would call a more traditional way, um, when it comes to scent clues. What would you call it? Just is it a hoof tracking? Would you call yourself a hoof tracker
Yeah.
from a methodology
Yep.
standpoint?
Yep.
Which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it links back to more of the more historic European style of training.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
It,
The German style, European style of using scent shoes
so
with hooves to be able.
I want to have you explain that. Explain the idea or explain what it is that you do. From a and just for people that are listening, now we've talked about the training techniques. Now I want to talk a little bit about the actual training itself and some of the tools and things that we use to lay tracks, because
Mhm.
ultimately that's what tracking is. Um, but Dean, I want you to explain your hoof shoes and the idea behind it, if you would.
So scent shoes or ferritin shoes, as they're called, is a way to lay scent or lay that hoof scent down, um, as you're walking and laying a track. So basically, there are many different styles out there. A lot of the old German ones are still wooden, with a hole in the bottom where you cut off a section of a deer's hoof, from their lower leg, and you attach that to the shoe, and you lay a track. I guess the idea is there that we're trying to get that dog to follow a particular scent. And the theory out there is that when a deer runs after they're shot, and they're mortally wounded, or they're really hurt, that they're giving off a pheromone, out of their interdigital gland. Um, and I guess the theory is that pheromone still kind of stays in there afterwards, and we freeze them and thaw them out and use them, and we are teaching the dog to track the line of a stressed or a hurt animal. You're going to get other people out there that say, well, that doesn't really matter, you can train them on any particular part. But I guess for me, that I've kind of jumped on that bandwagon, so to speak, and I feel like we've laid enough training lines to believe that I think
It's been
that's a
effective.
concept. Yeah, it's effective, and it's a concept that we can use because it's been successful for us.
Sure.
So you know, and I've gotten different sets of hooves that I feel like have been ineffective in laying lines, because I'll get a fresh pair of hooves out, and I have literally a whole group of dogs that struggle on that track, and I'm like, man, well, maybe the scent that we're looking for isn't there, because they're just not able to follow a line. And I get a new set of hooves out, and all of a sudden they all look like they're supposed to.
Sure.
So I do feel like there's something there to it. I'm probably not reading all into it scientifically,
Sure.
but I do believe that that there's a pheromone that's given out and honestly on a real deer there's so much more to it. And I feel like there's so much other scent there because I
Yeah.
do believe they give that pheromone out of other parts of their body, not just the hoof.
Right.
Their skin cells, their hair, their saliva, their blood, all those things
Right.
are, a complete scent picture. But how do we replicate that in an artificial line?
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's what we talked about like last
Yeah.
week is I'm like,
Yep.
we're so unique in the deer tracking world is that ideally, of course, I would love to be able to train on real deer all the time, 12 months out of the year. But
Yeah.
that's not the reality of it. Our season is in a sense 2.5 months long.
Right.
So how do I get a dog to where I want him to be on a very limited number of tracks in 2.5 months?
Right. Right.
I can't do it. So I'm forced to somehow do it another way. And this is a way that I feel is most effective.
Yeah.
It's and I we talked about I don't feel like there's any other type of hunting dog training where you are more reliant on an artificial approach where we are setting up situations like that, with they're real deer parts, but they're not the entire deer,
Sure. Sure.
versus like, well, bird dogs, well, I can go to I can plant liberated birds or I can have that, I have that ability to do that nearly year round.
Yeah.
I have coon dogs and we can run them as long as we're not killing them. We can run them coon dogs on a real coon all year.
Yeah.
Even man trailing, where you can like lay tracks with actual people
Right.
or detection. You're doing with the actual scent that you're using that the dog's going to go out and find, or bear dogs or retrievers or whatever. You can use real ducks and you can use
Sure.
the real thing.
Yeah.
We're using parts of the real thing, so that's where I feel like it's so unique, versus any other type of training,
Sure.
that we need to kind of modify and do things. And is there more than one way to do it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just feel like to get a dog where I want them to be and where I'm comfortable with them being, that I feel like that's one of the better ways to do it.
Sure.
Are there other ways to do it? And not everybody has the access to all the materials all the time.
Right. Right.
I feel, is it best to use the real thing, the real materials? Yeah. But not everybody has the ability to use the real materials all the time.
Right.
Or you might get a dog, you might not be thinking about getting a dog during hunting season. And all of a sudden now it's spring and, oh man, I want to do this. And now we have nothing.
Right.
So how do you go about getting that?
Yeah. Which is, which is exactly why we do what we do with our scent. We make that blood trail scent. And you and I have messaged a little bit back and forth on this too, because I do not put any glands. Like the whole idea of interdigital gland, and I probably should talk to a biologist about it because I've read about it and I don't know that I've
Mm-hmm.
ever the stuff that I have found out about it, I think I'm right, but the idea of the interdigital, like it's probably one of the most common questions I get is, do you have interdigital gland scent in your blood trail? And
Mm-hmm.
we don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I make it. I make blood trail by myself. And when you just rambled off a few of the things that deer happens when you shoot a deer, there's all sorts of scents that come off of it. You mentioned saliva, dander, hair, blood. There's when you shoot a deer in different parts. This is one of my thought processes with it is when you shoot a deer in different areas of the deer, it creates different scenting things.
Mm-hmm.
A liver shot deer has to smell different to a dog than a lung shot deer. I can smell it. It smells different.
Right.
A
Right.
gut
Mm-hmm.
shot deer smells very different than a lung shot or heart shot deer or a liver shot deer for that matter. I can smell that. Like we always, the guy that smells the arrow after he gut shoots the deer, it's like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, it's like a caveman sticking his hand out in the rain. Like it's an instinctive thing I think we do is we want to understand it's a natural thing. And I think it's very clear and understandable that there are different scent clues put off by wounded animals based on their wounds. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's part of my mindset when I make the scent that I make. So I've got a freezer. I always tell this story, but I've got two freezers in my garage. My wife doesn't go in one of them because she doesn't
Right.
want to see what the hell's in that freezer.
Yeah.
Because over the season, we collect certain things as we harvest deer, and and it's not just me because I don't shoot enough deer anymore. But our whole team, the guys that I work with, and we have
Sure.
friends that have farm tags, and we align ourselves to be able to collect enough stuff to make us through the next year. So we're going to be I just made a batch of it up out of what was left in my freezer, and now we're going to be into the fresh season, and then you start talking about aging, because we were talking about aging tracks. But I when we talk about aging tracks, I think it's to the effect of like dissipating scent, like
Hmm.
but I also think, personally, I think, and the reason I think is because I've done this so often now for so many years, is like I age blood prior to freezing it. I don't freeze it all fresh. So part of the stuff that I put into my scent is collect it from the deer. It's cold out, it's in November. I put it in
Hmm.
my truck, I bring it home, I put it in the freezer. I also have some that sits for periods, and all these bottles are all labeled. There's different times that the actual scenting elements that I've got in these bottles get exposed to sunlight. They get exposed to
Hmm.
warmer temperatures, because as the stuff like breaks down, I think the scent changes. And I think
Sure.
it's like this decomposing effect that's taking
Hmm.
place. Not only is it probably getting a little bit lighter in intensity, but I think it's also changing. And at times, I think some of it is easier for the dogs to smell than the freshest, because I think there
Sure.
are certain bacterias and things
Yep.
that happen that
Hmm.
make it a thing that the dog is able to track. And I also think that it helps them understand like direction of track, like
Sure.
which direction, because the front end of the trail smells different than the end of the trail, because the front end might be 8 hours fresher than the end of the trail.
Hmm.
So as the dog progresses along the line, I think it does help them. Like when you hit a pheasant and it runs, cripple and it runs across, you'll never see that. And that's a really short window of time. Like it could be in the last minute or two, and you
Hmm.
get a dog onto it and the dog cuts the track. You'll never see the dog run. And it's blind to them. They didn't see the bird.
Hmm.
When they cut the track, you don't see them run at the back. You don't see them run backwards.
Right.
I mean, I think they are so intelligent, and that brain is such a computer that it's processing that way smells older than that way, and I'm going that way. And it's logical, and then they find whatever it is they're finding. So when I make my scents, it's close to a dozen. Sometimes I don't always get that full amount of variation in, but like the scent I make is a combination of like lots of scent clues of
Hmm.
varying degrees and intensities. They're not all the same. Like one year's batch is going to be different than the next year's batch, and batch to batch is actually different. So, but it's all very similar. It all has a very rank smell to it when I send it down to the company to bottle it.
Right.
It stinks, but it's concentrated how I send it to them. We have a company that bottles it for us. They're in Tennessee. They do all the most the dog scents on the market, like the bird scents and all
Sure.
that kind of stuff. And so they have all the facilities for it. And so I send them a concentrate, and then they dilute it down to what I think is the right amount from a training perspective.
Sure.
And then they bottle it, and then they send it back, and it's stabilized naturally. So it's got a natural preservative in it that stabilizes it, but it will change over time. But so
Sure.
does the real thing. Like that's my
Yep.
my whole thought with it. But the interdigital part for me, the reason we don't include it in that scent is because I don't know how in the hell you actually would get it. I don't
Sure.
believe you can actually get it. Um, do I think if you cut a deer's hoof off, do I think there's an interdigital gland in between the hoof? Yes. And from everything I've understood is that it's unique to the deer. So like it's kind of like a fingerprint on a person, where
Hmm.
you could track a lot. If you could teach a dog to track the specific deer based on the interdigital gland, you could run through a herd and the dog could sort through it. And like
Hmm.
this deer is this smell, and that's the one I'm going to follow, which, is upper level stuff, but that's what they need to be able to do in order to work through all these distractions.
Hmm.
So, but the idea of collecting the interdigital just doesn't make sense to me. It's a lot like preorbital gland sense. I don't know who the hell is who's pulling enough preorbital gland scent to put it into a bottle and sell it to a guy to put in a scrape? I don't buy it. I'm a believer in the deer doing it. So like
Sure.
our Hodag line of products is not a deer scent. It's not a glandular scent because I don't I don't think you can get that. We want to stimulate the deer to put theirs on it because the deer produce it naturally, constantly. Same with the
Hmm.
interdigital. But once you cut that foot off, I can't wrap my mind around for a little while you're going to have some residual,
Right.
but after you lay so many trails and you walk through the dirt and the mud and the muck and the everything else, I'm going, it's not producing scent anymore.
Right.
But I do
So
think there's
we get
hair.
about, yeah, we do get I would say on average probably 5 to 6 tracks out of a set of hooves. And
Sure.
then I pitch them and put a new,
Sure. Which makes
fresh one in there.
sure. So you
So
must, I mean, you collect a lot of hooves throughout the year.
yeah. Yeah. So I mean, and when we're laying a lot of lines, we might be we're putting a set of fresh hooves in daily.
Right.
So, I have 2 or 3 freezers that I have
Sure.
that are full of hooves, and we collect blood too, and because I incorporate blood, and and my end goal is to try to get to you know hoof only or pretty close to it,
Yeah.
but I do believe there's blood scent, whether we can see it or not,
Totally.
on most every track. So I mean, like I said, our end goal is for a dog to be able
Yeah.
to follow a nearly hoof only or a hoof only track, but um, I do put it in there. Um,
So is the and I get that, but I think it's important to understand why. And is the why because that's a real deer, or is the why because that's a very challenging track? That's a low volume, if you will,
mhm.
scent. Like that's a
Yep.
it's a challenge where I look at it and I go, and I'm not trying to like, and I know you're not arguing with me on it because
Yeah.
like
Right.
you and I have talked about it. There's just different ways of doing this. What I think is value, what I think the value that we bring from a dog bone perspective for folks that are training their own dogs, and if you're a pro too and had an interest in it, but like it makes it accessible to be able to go to the store or order it online and
Oh,
have the
sure.
stuff in July that you
Right.
want to start working on that dog that you're going to, that's a year old and you're hoping to track a
Hmm.
few deer with. And so our idea with it is to make it so that it is something that more people can do and more people can do with less resistance or friction. And
Sure.
but at the same time, I do think it needs to be effective. I'm not selling it if I don't think it works. And
Sure.
so for me personally as a trainer, that's the technique I've used, but I'm not saying that I'm against the idea of hoof training or scent shoes, but for me it's a little more fucking around and it's a little bit more
It's
and
harder.
it's and honestly, I'll be honest, I've never done it, but I would say that just hoof track training with my younger dogs is probably a little, for some of them it's going to be over their, so it'll be a little over their head, and
Sure.
I would have to sweeten the pot for them a little bit. I'd have to
Sure.
do some incorporation of multi sense or more sense from a more intense standpoint. That's why I
Hmm.
like high drags. I love a high
Hmm.
drag, and I realize the deer doesn't drag his body along, but the deer definitely exfoliates. And the deer
Sure.
definitely loses hair, and the deer definitely, back to the pheromones, I think adrenaline is probably one of the most potent scenting things for dogs. I think that's what the reason I say this is because of a canine guy that I talked with
Sure.
that used to track. Do you know a guy named Mitch Serling? Do you know that name?
Mm-mm.
He was a
Don't.
canine guy in New York. I met him at the ATA show a bunch of years, but he trained tracking dogs in New York City.
Hmm.
And one of the things that he kept telling me about was, but for people, for tracking
Sure.
people.
Hmm.
And when he kept talking about a criminal, when a criminal commits a crime, it is an absolute rush of adrenaline through their body. And a lot of
Sure.
times that's connected to some of that activity. Like
Right.
they're criminals because they get a high off of it. But their
Right. Right.
body puts off adrenaline because they're being pursued. They know they've done something wrong. There's all these things. And then
Hmm.
stress. they're also under stress at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Stress creates exfoliation. And so
Sure.
when I bring my dogs to the
I know
vet,
exactly what you're going to
they've got
say. Yeah.
shiny, nice coats, and I'm so proud of
Yep.
them because I feed them well and I put them on great
Yep.
supplements. And then they get to the vet and they're dry and white and flaky, and the vet goes, "Ooh, a little dry skin." I said, "No, it's just because they're here right now because they're under
Yeah.
stress." And they
Yeah.
look and that bot, that's the clearest thing where you can see, holy cow, there's now if that dog
Yep.
shakes or runs through the woods, it's leaving. If we could have the eyes to see it, it's
Sure.
leaving this path of it, which all is, it would to me is all very, very legitimate scent clues for the dog.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so to replicate that in the track with the shoes, I think you don't get some of that stuff. So I would need to give my dogs
Sure.
a little more oomph as far as the scenting,
Sure.
which is so I like the hides for that. I do use small pieces of hide. I usually use the hide as the carrier of the liquid scent.
Sure.
I do
Mm-hmm.
think probably what I do after talking with you about this is I probably do wait too long to maybe challenge, like, because I can break the line too. I can pick the hide up off the ground
Yep. Yep.
and break it and create gaps, and I can control how much scent I do or don't put out or put
Mm-hmm.
on the hide and that kind of stuff. But so we we're different in that technique, but we're probably really similar in the concept of it. And I don't want to discredit yours, and I don't think you're discrediting ours. But it's
Nope.
important for me to like I do feel a little bit like I want to defend why we do and what I do and
Sure.
why we do it because you are a pro and I don't and I'm not looking for you to say, "Hey, you're all right, you're fine." But at the same time, some people really are hung up on the idea of you can't train a dog to track if you're not using interdigital gland, or you
Sure.
can't
Sure.
train them to track if you're not a hoof tracker. And I go, no, I
Well,
think there's lots of ways to do it.
yeah. No, there in prior in the in the US before really before scent shoes got popular, a lot of people just used straight blood and
Sure.
just drip blood along the way. There's a lot of different ways to go from point A to point B. Um, and and uh, and we talked about this the other day is that, and I don't believe that we are too far off in like how we layer our training and how we go about training. It's just that we're using a different material
Hmm.
to get from where we want to be.
Sure.
And that might look different for different people as far as what is accessible to them. But and I'm not big on dragging things. Have I done it? Will I do it? Yes. Um, but and maybe I do it backwards. But I don't or I won't do it unless I feel like a dog is not catching on.
Sure.
And then I will drag for them. And then until I feel like they're getting the point or they're getting the concept, and then I'll start moving away from a drag and just going to shoes and blood.
Hmm.
Um, so it is part of
What's
it,
the
and
reason? What is the reason to not? Is it because you think it's too easy
um,
that you don't
I
do the
think
drag?
so at first. At first, I do. Um, so, and I guess it's no other reason as far as then I don't feel like I'm not gonna drag anything. I don't want to drag I don't want to drag anything.
Sure.
So, but there's a lot of people that do. There's a lot of people that start out with liver drags
Yeah.
or hide
Yep.
drags
I
or
do that.
whatever, and
Yep.
then they graduate. And a lot of very successful dogs have been, and very very good dogs have been started and trained that way. Um, but that's just not. I guess that's just not how I go about doing it. So not that it, like I said, not that it can't be done that way,
Yeah,
and
that's the
not that
important
there's
part. To me, that's the important part to hear you say. It's not that you don't think it works, it's that you don't it's not a technique that you typically use, and and unless I'm saying it wrong, it's not something you typically think you need with your
right,
dogs,
right,
which
and
makes total sense.
yeah, and so like I said, but I've had dogs where I just feel like for whatever reason aren't connecting the dots, and I don't feel like whatever I'm doing, laying a track with shoes and blood at the start, or even using a food reward mixed in there, that man, they're just for whatever reason, this
Sure,
just must not be enough scent for them.
sure.
So we'll incorporate a drag in there, and then all of a sudden it's like light bulb goes on and this
Yeah.
dog starts walking down the line, and I'm like, all right, we're going to do this for a few more times
Yeah.
until I feel like they're grasping the concept, and then we're just
Sure.
going to start to gradually make it harder.
Sure.
So, but like you said, you probably bring your dogs along slower, and they're probably capable of much more than you think that they're
Sure.
capable of as far as that goes.
Yeah.
And but I mean, I just feel like it just once we get going, it just lays so much more scent down, and maybe that replicates the real world more because I feel like a deer gives off way more scent than we
Yeah.
can ever replicate,
Agreed. Yep.
to be honest.
Yep.
But I feel like if I can get a dog to follow an old cold line just using scent shoes and maybe a small amount of blood over the course of 24 hours in amongst all these distractions, if they can follow that little ascent,
Sure.
even though my scent is still there,
Yep. Yep.
if they can follow that little ascent over that period of time, man, they should really have no problem
Sure.
following a pretty complex deer track through whatever distractions
Yep.
when there's that much more scent there.
Yeah. To me,
So
that's like shooting at 60 yards. And when you practice, because you're going to hunt no further than 40, 40 is easy
yeah,
when you know you can shoot
right.
60. And so
So
go ahead.
yeah, my theory was just going to be is that I want to make things and I want to prepare and make things harder than they're ever going to be for them
Sure.
in the real world.
Sure. And
So
when you said
and
that,
I go ahead.
I was just gonna say and it probably explains the difference. My mindset is always, especially with people that maybe aren't real seasoned trainers.
Hmm.
My feeling is make it as easy as you can to succeed because I feel like that gives people and dogs momentum at times early on
Sure.
in the beginning. So like, for me, do you ever hear Dave Ramsey? He's like a
The
financial
name
guy.
sounds familiar.
He's like a does financial stuff.
Okay.
It's this course that my wife
Sure.
and I took. It's financial peace, it's called, but it's this guy. He's got these concepts about finance stuff, but it's and how to get out of debt. And so we took this class on it at our church and stuff. And anyway, he's got this thing that he calls this debt snowball. And so some of it doesn't make sense if you run the numbers because like he'll tell you to get rid of your debt from smallest to biggest regardless of interest rates. So financially, you could totally say it doesn't make sense. You should pay your highest interest off first because it's going to be more in the long run or whatever. But his whole idea with it is he says no, because no one will ever see it through. When you do it
Oh,
that
sure.
way, that's
Yep.
too
Hmm. Hmm.
complicated and people
Sure.
won't succeed. So I make it easy for you because I say there's these baby steps in how to do this. And the first thing is you save $1,000. And so then and I don't know what all the steps are, but there's all these steps. But the thing is to do all the steps, you start with the easiest one,
Sure.
which his theory is it's a mental thing
Hmm.
so that the person gets a win and
Yeah.
realizes we're going the right direction. And
Hmm.
then he does the second easiest thing, and they take the momentum for the first thing into the second, and then they knock the second one out. Then they take the
Hmm.
momentum from one and two, and they knock the third thing out.
Yep.
And by the time they get going, by the time they get where it really actually matters, they got so much momentum going, you can't be stopped. And
Sure.
I was like a total skeptic of him when I first started in on this little journey, but it was so true because it was just such a mental thing for me.
Sure.
And he won me over because what he said was actually going to happen. And I feel like sometimes, now that's a little bit of a stretch for the analogy, but I feel like for me when I'm working these young dogs, especially myself too, because I do think we're part of this team. And I think it's important to get wins for people early without building a false sense of security of like, you can't make them think like they're some big veteran trainer, but like get a win with your dog.
Yeah. Yeah. For
But
sure.
understand, then make it a little harder, but don't overdo it, and like baby steps. So like you're starting out, and I think it makes total sense because of your experience, and it makes sense because of your abilities. you have more abilities than the average person that's going to train a tracking dog. So I'm giving them training wheels to put on their
Sure.
training wheels. And I think that it's the reasoning. And I think
Sure.
that that's my idea is like, because my idea with all of this is, boy, it'd be nice to help a lot more people find their deer, like,
Sure.
and I think that was early on, that was an issue when I came out with some of the products that we have. And you probably heard, I mean, you're in that, it's a small circle, like
Absolutely.
the tracking world is a small circle. And got a lot of backlash from some people that were really critical of the stuff we were doing. And the reason was is I kept asking, what's what bothers you the most about this? And most of it came back to a lot of it came back to trackers who were actually like professional trackers who some got paid, some didn't get paid,
Sure.
all that was, unique to the individuals. But like people that did it very, very seriously on a really high level were really upset at the idea of you're going to have a whole bunch of people out training dogs or tracking for people and charging them money and not giving them a good product. And I said, wait a minute. That's not the intention. Now, could
Sure.
that happen? Yes. And do I have to be careful about that? Should. But like
Hmm.
the intention was not that. The intention was I personally, it's Sunday night. I wound a doe. There's a guy down the road that'll come track it for $500. I got to go to work in the morning. Boy, I
Right.
wish I had a dog that I could take out and find
Sure.
that deer. And so it was like, it wasn't to create more professional trackers. And the UBT, we had some stuff with the UBT for a while because
Hmm.
some of the UBT members were very upset about it. But the UBT was like, hey, guys, and I give them credit for this. They said, nowhere does it say learn to be a professional tracker, buy my kit. It was
Right.
learn to train your dog to find a deer, a mortally wounded deer, find more
Sure.
deer. That was the whole
Sure.
idea. And so once people started, I think, to hear that message and hopefully recognize that, yes, that is what they're after here. That seemed to shift it a little bit, but again, it's like it's the concept. And I do think that the starting point is important, but it matters like how do you progress? And
Hmm.
once you get to a certain point, our progression is probably we align, like I catch up to you eventually if I do
Sure.
my job right, is the hope
Right.
anyway.
Right. In the in the finishing or the finished product is going to come in the real world.
Totally.
On in it, I don't think any dog is ever going to reach their full potential if they don't get on enough real
Right.
life tracks.
Right. It's 100%. 100% agreed. And
So
that's where that level of commitment by you guys like yourself, that's what sets that aside. Because I've always said that's why when I mentioned it earlier, easy is a tricky word to use because it can offend some folks. And I don't, but what I will say is dedicated trackers are like dedicated houndsmen who are like dedicated bird dog guys who are like dedicated, you name it. They're they're they become very good because of their level of commitment. And that level
right,
of commitment forces them, they have to put in tons and tons and tons of work. And that's not easy.
right,
And so I don't want to confuse people, but I do also want to make sure that we don't paint this picture to folks that um, it's an extremely difficult thing that only a very select few in the world will ever be able to pull off because that will intimidate folks too, and
right.
that'll leave deer in the woods.
Sure,
So it's this
sure.
fine line for me.
Right, right. And I get it often. Like, how long does it take to train a dog up to the level of this dog? And we find a deer with Sway, my main dog, and they're like,
Sure,
well, how long does it take to train a dog like that? Or I'm like, well, I said I might never see another dog like this,
sure,
you know, i- of my own in my life.
yeah,
So that's a pretty hard question to
yeah,
answer. How long does it take to train the average dog to be serviceable to most people? That's a little more of an answerable question.
right, right,
Um, and it really lies also as to what are your standards
right,
as far as what a good dog is and what isn't, and as far as their capabilities and whatnot, that varies greatly too, because what is a really good dog to somebody, you know, might might be here, and what I think is a really good dog is right here.
Sure. It's
And it's
relative.
just
Yeah.
as to you only have uh, the ability to think about that concept as to what you've seen and but exposed to.
Hmm.
In the
Yeah.
great majority of people have never really been exposed to that you know what I mean, that
Right. Right.
exceptional
Right.
high level dog. And have I ever seen a super duper high level retriever? Probably not. I've had some pretty decent ones, some serviceable ones of my own. I would never say that they're an upper echelon type thing. And the same
Sure.
thing with, I've ran other types of hounds, and I've had pointings dogs myself and flushing dogs myself. And I've had some pretty serviceable dogs that do what makes me happy, when what I would
Right.
expect. But does that mean that's going to make somebody else happy?
Right.
Not
Right.
not at all. So
Right.
there's varying levels, and that's the same thing for the dogs that come out of here. I want to be proud of the dogs that come out of our training program.
Right.
Um, but there are some that are going to be much better than others.
Sure.
And a lot of that is based on their genetic capabilities to
Right.
begin with.
Right. Right.
What's their genetics? What is their ceiling?
Right.
Um, and but the bottom line is they're going to be serviceable to 99% of the population.
For
They're going to
sure.
be able to go out and find a deer for
Yeah.
that. That's findable, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know,
Which is
not
which
that.
is which is the important for me, that's the very important parts, like, and that's the part that um I hope I hope that's what we're offering. I hope that's what we're able to help people with, is because
Hmm.
that serviceable dog, that functional dog, that beneficial dog to have in the field, whether you're losing ducks or pheasants or deer, the dog, the conservation tool part of it, which
Hmm.
which you've I'm sure you've seen it. I have seen it. I have seen dogs on marshes that are absolutely like no training at all. And I don't even know if I don't know if they have much going on for genetics either, but even those dogs will find a
Right.
duck or two for you
You're
that
right.
you otherwise wouldn't. There's a place for that, you know,
Right.
like
Right.
everybody doesn't have to run with a hunter retrieving champion to
Right.
make in order to go out to the marsh and shoot ducks. And
Oh.
so that's the thing but I also think that this comes back to the people. If you're going to, and this is where, and I respect and understand the concerns of some of the professionals out there from both a training perspective and from a tracking perspective, is there's a liability or a risk involved. And this goes back to the individual that's handling the dog to
Hmm.
understand at what point do you start to market yourself or sell yourself, both literally and physically,
Hmm.
as this idea of a service that is something to be paid because you're bringing value. And if you
Sure.
don't, and that's not to chase anyone away from the idea of it, but it's just like, if you do concrete work and you're not that good, you shouldn't charge that much. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't do concrete work. You should do concrete work to get better at doing concrete work.
Right. Right.
If you're tracking, if you're looking to be a professional tracker, everyone's got their own ways
Which
to do
there's
it.
very few of, by the way.
Right, right. I think if you're thinking about that as an aspiration, I think you should do a few seasons, depending on the number of tracks you take. I think you should do a few seasons pro bono, because I think that's that you owe those people
Absolutely.
for giving you
Absolutely.
the opportunity to become a professional. So like now some guys will put their nose up, oh, I spend my money on my gas and all that. I get it. I totally get it. But me personally, if that were my thing, I just there's a certain point where you realize and feel it where you go, you know what? My dog and I are a value of X, and
Hmm.
that's what we should be charging for our services, because it is a time thing, like, and I get that. I totally get that. But I also go, but that's not my world, and that's not what I'm targeting, and that's not what you know,
Right.
I have to
No,
circle
and
it back and go, I want the guy that lives down the road from me, and calls me and says, "Hey, I hit this doe back. can you bring Taylor tomorrow morning? Sure, I'll bring Taylor. She doesn't go on a lot of tracks, but when the deer's dead, she finds them. And I'm not a pro trainer. I'm not a pro tracker, but I
Right.
but I feel very confident in that dog. And
Sure.
she's good. And he's my neighbor and I'm going to do it. But when they call me,
Absolutely.
I have your number to send them because that's
Right.
because that's not my thing, you know?
Right. And I I 100% agree with you. You moving back a couple steps on, you know, somebody charging for their services, whatever, whatnot. Um, God, I nowhere else, nowhere else in the hunting world do people pay you to get experience for your dog.
Right.
Let's
Right.
think about that for a second. You know, trackers, and maybe I'm probably going to make a lot of people upset when I say this because we're still we've been in a long time and we're still a tip based service because I don't want to put it out of the reach of anyone. Do I make
Sure.
my living that way in the fall? Absolutely, I do. But um, I will say we take tips. Here's what our average range is.
Sure.
And still, what people pay us is much less probably than someone with a lot less experience than we have in potentially not as good of a dog that we're bringing to the table. But in no other area of hunting do you get paid to get experience for your dog. Or like, oh, I have a green dog and I'm going to go out and I'm going to charge people because I'm providing a service. Well, they're providing you with training opportunities.
Right. Right.
I feel like almost in that respect, like, God, I should be paying you to come out and track your deer because it's a training opportunity. What if I go what if I go to the game farm and I'm going to train my dog? I'm paying money for birds and I'm paying money to go out
Right.
there and do this. But on the flip side, because we're providing a service, um, we expect to be paid for it. And like I said, I'm probably going to make a lot of people upset when I say that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with charging, but I don't believe in charging until you have a dog that you have proven that has the experience to be able to go out there and
Yeah.
adverse conditions and in
Sure.
situations and whatever else to be able to go out there and find a deer and to prove themselves, so to speak. I don't believe in trackers going out there with an inexperienced dog and they're new to it, and just because they've got all kinds of money wrapped up into it, that
Sure.
they want to charge for it. Well, that's great. I have, you know, when I ran bird dogs, I have X amount of dollars tied up into dog food, vet bills, training equipment, all this other stuff. It's a hobby of mine. I pay to go do it.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? It's part
Right.
of the expense of owning a dog.
Right.
Um, but that's my
Yeah.
whole
Yeah. No,
theory on that subject.
I think it always I think it like most things, it comes back to personal ethics, I think is probably the right word. Business ethics is probably applicable in that situation, but like and that's not for I don't feel like it's for me to say, and I don't think you think it's for you to say
No,
what is or isn't acceptable. But
right?
it is one of
Just
those
my
things that
opinion.
yeah, it is one of those things that comes up and people talk about it. And I always make a point of, yeah, I get that. And that's one world of it. The other world is the guy that's got the beagle at home that would love to give it a job and he shoots a whole bunch of deer with his buddies and they, like there's value in that too and I do
Mhm.
think that that from a if you're talking business that's a market those are people that we are trying to help and I
Yeah,
think that you know so that's where the tools overlay with the
sure.
philosophy
Hmm.
which we're just not that far apart. There are differences, but we're probably pretty aligned with a lot of the stuff, which I think
Yeah,
is
for
which
sure.
is part of why I wanted to talk with you. Part of it was just to get to try to steal information from you and get that out of you. But no, I and I also think that there's a lot of people that I don't think realize um some people maybe don't realize the aspect of there are actually people out there that this is what they're building their income, their livelihood off of, which is pretty cool. And we're friends beyond that, but I did think if there's someone, and the guys in our shop have been talking about it. We're like, we really need to talk to more people about tracking stuff because I will not call myself a professional tracker. I'm not. I have dogs that will find deer that are mortally wounded. I also have, and this is a point that people bring up too, is whenever you start talking to them, well, how many deer do your dogs find, and what percentage do they find? And I personally, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. But I've always answered, if the deer is dead, I got a really good chance of finding it
For
with a
sure.
good dog. But
Absolutely.
if what I think it's because I think people start kind of creating value out of statistics, which, you
Hmm.
know, numbers
We
mean
can
so
skew
much.
those.
Yeah, and numbers mean a lot to our society, and I get all
Yep.
that. But like, yes, they can be skewed, but I also go, if you track every deer, your percentage is going to be really low. Like the
Right.
best trackers get to be real good detectives, I think,
Hmm.
because your
Yeah.
time is worth something. And
Yep.
it's like, I'm not, I've told people, no, I'm not coming to look for your deer because
Yeah.
they've showed, hell, half of them, a lot of people put it on, film it. Like, I got a GoPro video,
Yeah.
show me the video. And then they show me the video and I'd say, no, I'm not coming to look for it because we're never going to find it. And
Yeah.
they're disappointed in that. I, I just can't. I just can't.
Sure.
I'm not going to spend. I've seen enough deer get shot now
Yeah.
to realize like there's a really high or low percentage at times,
Sure.
and it's not to protect stats on my dog because I don't keep
Hmm.
stats on my dog, but it's to protect like my own interest. And I feel like a
Sure.
tracker like you has to have that. You got to have that spidey sense as well to understand
Oh,
like
for sure. And if you talk to my wife, and she's heard me on enough hunter interviews, and she'll be like, before I even walk out the door, you're not finding that one. You're not finding that one. Or yeah, it sounds like one you're going to find. And there are, in a lot of cases, you're probably right on those with your sense.
yeah,
But there's definitely ones out there that sound terrible,
sure,
and you go out there and the dog walks right to them.
yep, yep,
Um, for me, it's a matter, and it depends on what time of the year it is for me. Early in the season, I take is almost every call that I can actually physically get to.
hmm,
Um, and I'll be honest, and so we don't screen a lot of calls early in the year because I want to do a lot of tracks. I like tracking. This is what we do,
yeah,
and I want to be out tracking every day. So, if somebody, but I'm also upfront and honest about it. Whereas somebody calls me with a high back shot or a shoulder shot, and I'll be like, I'm gonna be honest, this doesn't sound really good at all.
right,
I mean,
right,
we'll come and take a look, but I'm telling you, the odds are really probably pretty low that we're going to find this deer. And some
sure,
guys will say, I don't care. I want you to come out. I just want peace of mind.
yep, yep,
And okay, we'll come out then. If and this is not during a busy time of the year.
sure,
Um, we'll come out and we'll take a look. But and there are other guys that will say, all right, well, based on your experience and what you've seen, uh, I trust your opinion, and let's not come out then.
right,
They
right,
give me the whole scenario and how much blood and how far they've tracked and all this kind of stuff, and
hmm,
odds are we're pretty close. You get those that like, man, I really don't think your deer is dead, and all of a sudden, an hour later they send you a picture of the deer that's
right,
dead, and I'm like, well, hey, I'm glad I was wrong.
right,
Um,
exactly,
but I'm not saying that you shouldn't go look for it, but I'm saying that the odds of us helping with the dog
right,
aren't very good.
right.
But then when we get later in the year, when our call volume is through the roof and we're getting 40 or 50 calls a day, during the rut to
Yeah,
track, well, I'm going to try to be as efficient as possible and try to go on these calls where I believe that we can help the hunter that I think their deer is likely dead, and we're going to go out and find it, and we'll be able to go help the next person
right, right,
versus us going out there and spending 2.5 hours on a high back shot or a shoulder shot that I'm pretty sure that's not dead to begin
yeah,
with.
yeah,
you
yeah,
know so I'm going to go out and I'm going to look for deer that I believe are dead and that we can help people find that they just can't find.
sure,
So, and that's hard to manage too. You know what I mean? We're trying to be strategic about where we, what area we're taking tracks in, so we're not wasting a whole bunch of time on the road. And I might take a whole, a group of tracks in this area, and I might take a group of tracks in a different area on another day or whatever it is. But those are all things to take into account. But like you said, you're not, and that's the case with a lot of trackers is they're not going to, regardless of time of the year, they're not going to take a track unless they think it's dead.
Yeah.
So, and those numbers are going to vary, recovery numbers are going to definitely vary on those trackers based on what kind of calls they take.
For sure.
So, but, I find that even early season when we don't screen as much, for whatever reason, they balance out. We might go 6 for 6, and then all of a sudden we go 0 for 6 or 0 for 7.
Sure.
And it's streaky like that. And man, if you're going to do it a lot, you got to have thick skin, and you got to have some mental toughness when it comes down to it, because it can, when it's good, it's good. But when you're struggling, it can eat you up, and it's mentally tough, and for you and for the dog.
I was just going to ask, how do you think that is for the dog? Like,
I think it really depends on
is it easier?
It depends on the dog. Like, even like my old dog, if the deer is not dead, she's going to tell me pretty early in the track that this is not a mortally wounded deer.
Mm-hmm.
And she's, quite honestly, is going to look like garbage, almost like an embarrassment, because she's going to be not enthusiastic. She's going to be loose on the line. Everything else is going to be more appealing to her.
Right.
But for me, I really try to prepare the hunter as to what they're going to see out of the dog if this is a mortally wounded deer versus a marginally shot deer that's flesh wounded or whatever the case.
Right.
But my main dog Sway doesn't seem to matter, to be honest with you. She's super intense and ready to work regardless, and that part doesn't seem to affect her if we find them or don't find them.
Sure.
She's just driven. She's got a different mentality when it comes to that. She's one of those dogs that is just, all she wants to do is work. And she's not happy unless I shouldn't say she's not happy, but she's much more happy when when she's doing her thing. You know what I mean? When we come home, she'll curl up on the couch and want to be petted for a little bit, but then she's going to go and lay on the end of the couch and like, leave me alone.
Sure.
Or go crawl into her kennel and be like, okay,
needs her time.
Leave me alone. And then, but as soon as it's time to work, man, she's game. She's like a switch flips, and she just turns into this different animal.
Sure.
So,
well, Dean, I took up a lot of your time here.
Well, this is fun. I could talk.
I enjoy it. I enjoy it.
Take a lot more.
And I might do that. I'm going to wrap it up here, but what I wanted to do was, so folks that are listening to this. So Dean's out of Wisconsin, Clintonville, right? Do you actually?
Yep.
Clintonville's
I live just on the south side of Clintonville.
So if you're listening to this and you are Wisconsin, Dean, let people know what's the best way, if they're interested in training, if they're in even, I mean, tracking is probably a word of mouth thing. You're not
sure,
but from a training perspective, if folks are interested in talking with you about helping them out with their dog, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Probably on our Facebook page, Messenger, Muig Dogs Deer Recovery and Training Kennel. You can find us on Facebook.
You don't have an Instagram page, do you?
I do.
Do you?
It's Muig Dogs Deer Recovery. Yep.
Okay.
At Muig Dogs Deer Recovery. I'm on there. You could probably look up my name, D Muthig, on Instagram as well. But I think my Instagram handle is at Muig Dogs Deer Recovery.
Okay. I got to follow that because I don't use Facebook nearly like I used to.
Sure.
And I'm on Instagram more than I am, and I link my accounts so whatever I do on Instagram.
And I don't do a ton. I don't do a ton of. I don't post a ton of stuff to Instagram. I may post some pictures and stuff like that, but our Facebook page is a little more popular. I do have a website, muckdogsdeerrecovery.com. And we have people contact us on there. There's a link to contact for training inquiries or questions or whatever, and that goes directly to my email. but Facebook is probably the easiest way.
Sure.
A phone number as well. You could probably texting is probably the best. We get a lot of just random texts out there, people from people that are interested in training. But
Sure.
my telephone number is 715-460-0102. And text is probably the best. We were talking about our cell services before.
Yeah.
I've got Cellcom, and my phone a lot of times doesn't ring in my house at all.
Yeah. I hear you.
So text is best, or Facebook Messenger.
Sure.
But we get a lot of training inquiries, and I'll be upfront and honest whether I can help or not. But um, you know, I can talk people through some things,
Yeah.
either over the phone or on Messenger back and forth, and give people ideas as to what to do, how to start dogs, different things like that, how we go about it.
Sure.
Um, but I steal a lot of ideas too. I mean, I branch out and do some things that are popular or they do in the man trailing world, and I just we kind of adapt it
Yeah. Makes
to
total
what we're
sense.
using. Absolutely. So there's like you said, there's different ways to do things, and I try to incorporate as many things that honestly make sense to me.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's some things that we do in particular that I feel they're easy enough to do, and it just makes too much sense not to do.
Sure. No.
Especially like when we get our young puppies and we get them and how we imprint them and different things like that. It's just it makes too much sense not to do it, and it definitely can't hurt
Right. Right.
in that respect. And it's a lot along the same lines as the throwing kibble out in the yard and having a dog search for it.
Sure.
But like I said, it's just in a more concentrated area, and we graduate from that. But
Yeah.
it just makes too much sense not to
Sure.
at least try it. You know.
Well,
So
I have seen, and I know you got some videos on Facebook too, because you've done you were doing some drone videos too, following
yeah,
tracks.
I did one so far, and it's so my drone has a
It'll track
program
you or
on it
something, won't
where
it?
it's a tracking. It's
Yeah.
a called dynamic track, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And so it just focused on me, and it just follows behind,
Sure.
as we're walking, and it follows behind and shows us on a training track.
Yeah.
I wish it was capable of following us through the woods, but there's just too much stuff in the way,
Right.
obstacle avoidance wise,
Right.
and to be
Right.
able to do
Right.
that. But it's still cool to be able to see and to
Totally.
watch, from above a different angle.
Yep.
Most of my videos on a GoPro on my chest, so you can just see my hand.
Yep.
Um, but it's nice to be able to see from behind,
I agree.
um, and above. I might start trying to implement and do some split stuff where I have GoPro video and then I have drone video,
Sure.
and where it's back and forth in there. But
Yeah.
you almost need to hire somebody to edit all that footage
I know. I have
to
two.
make it cool. Send it
We
send
hired.
it to one of your.
I know we hired two of them over the
Yeah,
years.
right.
So, but yeah, no, I know exactly what you're saying. Well, I appreciate you doing it because I do think I know exactly how much work it is. It's a ton of work, but I also feel like that that's that's why we're doing it is to try to be able to offer help for folks. So,
Sure.
and so I genuinely appreciate it when guys like yourself do it as well. So, thank you for giving me this time. Um, the seasons where we're recording this, I think the first is Sunday, I think.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so we're less than a week away from the first. Obviously, our deer season will be starting a couple weeks after that. Bear season, you do track for bears too, right?
Yep. Yep.
And
So
that's
our
coming
bear
up
season starts, a
week
week from
week
Wednesday.
from
So
Wednesday. So,
I hope to be
guys,
seeing a picture of you
yeah, I
here.
hope so. I'm busting my ass on it. I'm telling you what, man. Anyone who says that bear hunting is easy's never done it. It is
Right.
one of the toughest, but I'm really enjoying it. So, but yeah, I appreciate you doing this. I'd like to maybe we'll stay in touch and maybe we
Yeah,
connect
for
again and
sure.
maybe we connect again
Mhm.
during the season even. Well, we'll see what the time looks like for you, but maybe an
Right.
after
Right.
season. Um,
Sure.
but I thank you for doing what you're doing and being honest with me and that you can I know what type of dog guy you are and it I value it. So I appreciate you sharing that with other people as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you having me on.